Welcome to Christmas Stories for Sleep, where heartwarming holiday tales help you drift into peaceful dreams. Tonight, let the gentle sounds of falling snow and twinkling Christmas lights carry you away to the charming town of Carolton, Maine, where love and music create the perfect Christmas melody. Close your eyes, get comfortable, and let this story of Holly and Jax warm your heart as you settle into sleep. The final note of Pachelbel's canon in D hung in the air like crystal, pure and perfect, before dissolving into the hushed reverence of Lincoln Center's Avery Fisher Hall. Holly Peterson lowered her violin, her breath coming in controlled intervals as she acknowledged the thunderous applause with a graceful bow. The stage lights created a golden halo around her emerald silk gown, and for a moment she felt like she was floating. The final note of Pachelbel's canon in D hung in the air like crystal, pure and perfect, before dissolving into the hushed reverence of Lincoln Center's Avery Fisher Hall. Holly Peterson lowered her violin, her breath coming in controlled intervals as she acknowledged the thunderous applause with a graceful bow. The stage lights created a golden halo around her emerald silk gown, and for a moment she felt like she was floating. This was her world: polished marble floors, velvet seats filled with New York's cultural elite, and the intoxicating rush of technical perfection. At 28, Holly had achieved everything she'd dreamed of as a little girl practicing scales in her childhood bedroom. Principal violinist with the Manhattan Symphony, solo performances at the world's most prestigious venues, and a recording contract that ensured her classical interpretations would reach audiences across the globe. Yet as she walked off stage, accepting congratulations from fellow musicians and the concert director, something felt hollow. The applause faded too quickly, replaced by the familiar buzz of industry networking and tomorrow's rehearsal schedule. "Magnificent as always, Holly," called Margaret Chen, the symphony's manager, catching up with her in the corridor. The Times critic looked positively enraptured. "This performance will definitely boost album sales." Holly smiled politely, but her phone was already buzzing insistently in her small, beaded clutch. She glanced at the caller ID and felt her heart skip, not with excitement, but with a flutter of anxiety. "Carolton, Maine. Home." "Excuse me one moment," she said to Margaret, stepping into a quiet alcove near the dressing rooms. "Holly? Oh, thank goodness you answered." The voice belonged to Esmeralda Martinez, who had been coordinating Carolton's annual Christmas Eve concert for the past 15 years. Holly could hear the strain in her usually cheerful tone. "Esmeralda, what's wrong?" Holly pressed the phone closer to her ear, trying to block out the backstage chatter. "It's the community center, sweetheart. The heating system finally gave out completely last week, and the roof. Well, let's just say we're looking at some serious repair bills. The town council is talking about closing it permanently after the holidays." Holly's stomach dropped. The Carolton Community Center wasn't just a building, it was the heart of her hometown's Christmas celebration. Every year since she was 5 years old, the entire town had gathered there on Christmas Eve for a concert that brought together local musicians, families, and friends. It was where Holly had performed her very first solo, a trembling rendition of Silent Night that had earned her a standing ovation from all 63 audience members. "How much do you need?" Holly asked, already calculating numbers in her head. "Honey, we're talking about $40,000 minimum. The foundation has some cracks too, and you know how these old buildings are." Esmeralda's voice trailed off helplessly. 40,000. Holly could write that check herself, but she knew the community's pride would never accept such a gesture. Carolton was the kind of place where neighbors helped neighbors, but they worked for their solutions. "There might be a way," Esmeralda continued, her voice brightening slightly. "Santino Howard, you remember him from the town council. He says if we can raise enough money from this year's Christmas Eve concert, the town will match the funds. But we'd need to sell at least 300 tickets at higher prices. Maybe bring in some folks from Burlington and Montpelier." "That shouldn't be too difficult," Holly said, warming to the idea. "I can headline the concert, we could add some classical pieces that would draw a more sophisticated audience." "Well, that's the thing." Esmeralda's voice took on a careful tone. "Santino thinks we need to modernize the event a bit, appeal to a broader demographic. He suggested we collaborate with some of the local contemporary musicians. Holly felt her eyebrows furrow. Carolton was hardly a hotbed of musical innovation. The most contemporary act she could remember from her teenage years was old Mr. Patterson playing acoustic guitar at the summer farmers market. What kind of contemporary musicians? Well, you remember Jax Williams, don't you? He graduated a year behind you. The name hit Holly like a discordant note. Jax Williams. Of course she remembered him. It was impossible to forget someone who had been such a thorn in her side throughout high school. While she'd been perfecting her technique and earning first chair in every ensemble, Jax had been the class clown who thought music was just another way to get attention. She could still picture him in the back of music theory class, tapping beats on his desk and making their instructor, Mrs. Patterson, shake her head in exasperation. He goes by DJ Frost now, Esmeralda continued. He has a music studio downtown, and apparently he's quite successful. Santino thinks if we could combine your classical expertise with his, modern approach, we could create something really special. Holly closed her eyes and leaned against the wall. Esmeralda, I don't think you understand. Jax Williams doesn't take music seriously. He never did. This is the Christmas Eve concert we're talking about. It's a tradition, something sacred. I know, sweetheart, I know. But we're running out of options. The concert is in 3 weeks, and if we don't try something different. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Holly was quiet for a long moment, watching the last of the evening's audience members file past in their elegant coats and scarves. She thought about the community center's worn wooden floors, where she'd learned to dance during the monthly socials, the small stage where she'd discovered her love for performance, the folding chairs that held 3 generations of Carolton families every Christmas Eve. I'll be there tomorrow, she heard herself saying. I can stay through New Year's. Oh, Holly, really? That's wonderful. Esmeralda's relief was palpable. I'll call Jax tonight and set up a meeting. You two can figure out how to blend your styles. After hanging up, Holly stood in the alcove for several more minutes, watching the bustle of Lincoln Center wind down. A year ago, the idea of returning to Carolton for more than a weekend would have been unthinkable. Her schedule was booked solid through the following spring, with recordings and performances that represented the pinnacle of her career. But standing there, still wearing her concert gown in the harsh fluorescent lights of the backstage area, Holly realized she hadn't felt truly excited about music in months. Every performance had become technically perfect but emotionally flat, like she was going through the motions of someone else's dream. Maybe it was time to go home and remember why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. The next evening, Holly's rental car crunched through fresh snow as she drove down Carolton's main street. The town looked like a postcard from a more innocent time. Victorian houses with wraparound porches, their eaves dripping with icicles and string lights. Every shop window glowed with warm yellow light, decorated with garland and red velvet bows. The old-fashioned street lamps created pools of golden light on the snow-covered sidewalks, and Holly could smell wood smoke from chimneys mixing with the crisp mountain air. It was exactly as she remembered, and yet somehow smaller. The entire downtown area could be walked in 10 minutes, and Holly found herself noticing details that had been invisible to her teenage eyes, the way the paint was peeling on Monroe's hardware store, how Mrs. Chen's flower shop looked a bit shabby around the edges, the for lease sign in what used to be Robertson's bookstore. She pulled up in front of the community center and felt her heart sink. The building looked tired, its red brick facade darkened with age and weather. Several windows on the second floor were covered with plywood, and she could see a blue tarp stretched over one section of the roof. The marquee sign that used to announce upcoming events was dark, with several letters missing. But the Christmas decorations were still magnificent. Someone had wrapped every pillar with garland and white lights, and a massive wreath hung on the front door. It was the kind of determined cheerfulness that made Holly both proud and sad. This community would beautify their building, even if it was falling down around them. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the music spilling out of the center until she was climbing the front steps. It wasn't the classical pieces she'd expected to hear during setup. It was something with a heavy bass line that made the old wooden doors vibrate. Holly pushed through the entrance and stopped dead in her tracks. The main hall had been transformed into what looked like a recording studio. Professional lighting equipment cast dramatic shadows on the walls, and she could see expensive speakers positioned around the room. At the center of it all, a man was hunched over a complex array of electronic equipment, headphones around his neck, completely absorbed in adjusting levels and manipulating sounds. The music was unlike anything Holly had ever heard in this space. A remix of Silent Night that layered the familiar melody over a driving electronic beat. It should have been sacrilege, but somehow it wasn't. The traditional Christmas carol was still recognizable, but it pulsed with new energy, as if it had been awakened from a peaceful sleep and invited to dance. "Excuse me," Holly called out, raising her voice over the music. The man looked up, and Holly felt the air leave her lungs. Jax Williams had grown up. Gone was the skinny teenager with unruly dark hair who'd spent most of high school looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The man standing before her was tall and lean, with the same dark hair now styled in a way that looked effortlessly cool. He developed broad shoulders and strong arms that moved with confidence as he reached to turn down the volume. But it was his eyes that really threw her. They were still the same warm brown she remembered, but now they held a focused intensity that was completely new. "Holly Peterson," he said, and his voice had deepened into something that made her name sound like music. "I was wondering when you'd show up." He pulled off his headphones completely and stepped around the equipment to face her properly. He was wearing dark jeans and a gray sweater that looked expensive but casual, and Holly suddenly felt overdressed in her wool coat and city clothes. "Jax." She found her voice, though it came out slightly higher than usual. "I see you've redecorated." He grinned, and it was the same mischievous smile that had gotten him into trouble in high school, though now it seemed less like rebellion and more like genuine enjoyment of life. "Just setting up for our collaboration," he said, gesturing to the equipment. "I thought you might want to hear what Silent Night could sound like with a little modern interpretation." Holly felt her spine stiffen. "That was Silent Night? You didn't recognize it?" Jax looked genuinely surprised. "The melody is completely intact, just with some additional layers. Electronic music doesn't have to destroy classical pieces, it can enhance them, bring out elements that maybe people haven't noticed before." "Silent Night is perfect the way it was written," Holly said firmly. "It's been bringing people joy for over 200 years without needing a beat drop." Jax laughed, a warm sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "A beat drop? Is that what you think I added? Wasn't it?" "Come here," he said, walking back to his equipment. "Let me show you what I actually did." Holly remained where she was, arms crossed. "I'm not sure this is going to work, Jax. I agreed to help save the community center, but I won't compromise the integrity of the Christmas Eve concert." He turned back to face her, and his expression had shifted from amusement to something more serious. "Holly, do you remember why you started playing music?" The question caught her off guard. "What does that have to do with anything? Just humor me. Why did you pick up a violin in the first place?" She thought back to being 5 years old, sitting in this very room during a Christmas Eve concert, watching Mrs. Patterson play a solo that had made her mother cry happy tears. Because it was beautiful. Because it made people feel something. "Exactly," Jax said softly. "It made people feel something. Not because it followed rules or traditions, or because it was technically perfect, but because it connected with something inside them." Holly felt heat rising in her cheeks. "Are you suggesting that classical music doesn't connect with people?" "Not at all. I'm suggesting that maybe there are ways to help it connect with even more people." He paused, studying her face. "When was the last time you played a piece that surprised you? That made you feel like you were discovering something new?" The question hit closer to home than Holly wanted to admit. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt truly moved by her own performance, rather than simply satisfied with its technical execution. "The concert is in 3 weeks," she said instead of answering. "We need to start planning the program." Jax nodded, accepting the subject change. "Fair enough. But I have one request." "What's that?" Give me 20 minutes to show you what I had in mind before you dismiss it completely. If you hate it, we'll stick to a completely traditional program, and I'll just handle the sound system." Holly looked around the room, at the equipment that had probably cost more than most people's cars, at the professional lighting setup, at the obvious care that had gone into creating this temporary studio. Whatever else Jax had become, he clearly took his work seriously. 20 minutes, she agreed. Jax's smile could have powered the building's new heating system. Great. Let me start with something simple. He moved to a keyboard setup near the wall and played a gentle, familiar melody. Do you recognize this? The first Noel, Holly said immediately. Right, now listen to this. His fingers moved across the keys, and the same melody began playing, but this time it was layered with harmonies that seemed to come from somewhere deep and resonant. It was still recognizably the same Christmas carol, but it felt fuller, richer, like the musical equivalent of a warm embrace. Despite herself, Holly took a step closer. How are you doing that? Electronic music isn't just about beats and synthesizers, Jax explained, his hands still moving across the keyboard. It's about creating textures and atmospheres that acoustic instruments can't achieve on their own. Watch this. He pressed a few buttons, and suddenly Holly could hear her own violin playing along with the keyboard, except she wasn't playing. It was a recording he'd somehow made while she wasn't paying attention, but it had been processed to sound like it was being performed in a vast cathedral. With natural reverb, it made her violin sing in ways she'd never heard before. "When did you record me playing?" she asked, startled. "I didn't. That's a sample I pulled from one of your album recordings. Just a short phrase that I've matched to the key and tempo of what I'm playing now." He looked up at her. "You don't lose any of your artistry or technique. If anything, this setup allows people to hear the full beauty of what you're creating." Holly found herself moving closer to the keyboard, drawn in despite her reservations. "It does sound bigger." "Exactly. And imagine what it could sound like with you playing live, in real time, while I create this electronic atmosphere around your performance. We wouldn't be changing the traditional carols, we'd be giving them new life." For a moment, Holly could picture it. She could see the community center filled with families, their faces lit by the warm glow of Christmas lights as traditional melodies soared over innovative electronic textures. It could be something truly special, something that honored the past while embracing the future. Then she caught herself. "It's a nice idea, Jax, but this is the Christmas Eve concert. People expect certain things. They come to hear songs they've known their whole lives, performed the way they remember from their childhood." Jax stopped playing and turned to face her fully. "And what if we could give them that, but even better? What if we could make those childhood memories feel fresh and exciting again? What if we alienate them completely? What if they think we're making a mockery of their traditions?" "Then we'll lose the community center," Jax said quietly. "Because a traditional concert, no matter how beautifully performed, isn't going to sell 300 tickets at premium prices. We need something that will draw people from outside Carolton, something that will make them excited enough about the music to pay extra for the experience." Holly felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She'd come home thinking she could solve this problem the way she solved everything else, through technical excellence and careful preparation. But Jax was right. Excellence alone wouldn't be enough this time. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "That's all I'm asking." Jax began shutting down his equipment. "Why don't we start tomorrow with just the two of us? No pressure, no audience. We can experiment a little, see what works and what doesn't." "Tomorrow?" Holly realized she'd been so focused on the music that she'd forgotten about practical matters. "Where am I supposed to stay? My parents moved to Florida 2 years ago." "Christina Ramirez runs a bed and breakfast on Maple Street now," Jax said. "Used to be the old Henley house. She'll take good care of you." "Christina Ramirez?" "She was 3 years behind us in school. People grow up, Holly," Jax said with a smile. "Sometimes they even surprise you." As Holly drove the few blocks to the bed and breakfast, she found herself thinking about that last comment. She'd been so focused on becoming the musician she'd dreamed of being that she'd never really considered how everyone else's dreams might have evolved too. Christina's bed and breakfast was indeed a surprise. The old Henley house had been transformed into something that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The porch was strung with white lights and decorated with evergreen swags, and warm yellow light spilled from every window. A hand-painted sign in elegant script announced Pine Ridge Inn, a Christmas haven. Christina herself answered the door before Holly could even knock, and the years fell away as they embraced like the old friends they'd been. "Holly Peterson! I can't believe you're here!" Christina had grown into a beautiful woman with laugh lines around her eyes and silver-streaked hair that made her look distinguished rather than old. "I have your room already, the one with the fireplace and the view of the mountains." As Christina led her up a staircase lined with Christmas garland, Holly marveled at the transformation. Every detail was perfect, from the hardwood floors polished to a warm glow to the antique furniture that looked both elegant and comfortable. "This is incredible, Christina. You've created something really special here." "Thanks. It took me 5 years to get it exactly right, but I love what I do." Christina opened the door to a room that took Holly's breath away. A 4-poster bed was dressed in white linens and a red quilt. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, and French doors opened onto a balcony that overlooked snow-covered pine trees stretching toward distant mountains. "It's perfect," Holly breathed. "I thought you might like it." "And Holly?" Christina paused in the doorway. "I'm really glad you're here to help with the concert. This community center means everything to this town." After Christina left, Holly stood on the balcony despite the cold, looking out over the town where she'd grown up. From this vantage point, she could see the warm lights in windows, the smoke rising from chimneys, the snow-covered streets that looked like something from a Christmas card. It was beautiful, but it was also fragile. How many of these houses were occupied by elderly residents who might not be able to afford higher heating bills? How many young families had already moved away to places with more economic opportunities? How many businesses were hanging on by a thread, hoping each holiday season would provide enough revenue to make it through another year? The community center wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of Carolton's ability to survive and thrive. If they lost it, they'd lose more than just a venue for concerts and meetings. They'd lose a piece of their identity. Holly looked toward downtown, where she could just make out the outline of the community center. Tomorrow, she'd have to decide whether she was brave enough to risk everything on Jax Williams's vision of musical fusion. But tonight, for the first time in months, she found herself genuinely excited about the possibility of making music that could surprise her. Holly woke to the smell of cinnamon and coffee drifting up from the inn's kitchen, along with the soft sound of Christmas carols playing somewhere below. Sunlight streamed through the French doors, illuminating snow that sparkled like diamonds on the balcony railing. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous evening came flooding back, along with a flutter of nervous anticipation in her stomach. She'd agreed to meet Jax at the community center at 10 o'clock to experiment with their potential collaboration. All night, her dreams had been filled with strange musical combinations, classical melodies soaring over electronic rhythms, traditional carols transformed into something entirely new yet somehow familiar. Downstairs, Christina had prepared a breakfast that belonged in a gourmet magazine: fresh-baked croissants, local maple syrup, eggs Benedict with hollandaise that melted perfectly on her tongue, and coffee that tasted like it had been roasted by angels. "You're spoiling me," Holly said, settling into a chair by the window in the sunny breakfast room. "That's the point," Christina laughed, refilling Holly's coffee cup. "Besides, I have ulterior motives. Liliana Chavez is coming by this morning to talk about the Christmas festival decorations, and I was hoping you could give us some input on how to coordinate with the concert." Holly nearly choked on her coffee. "Liliana Chavez is still in charge of festival decorations?" 37 years running, Christina confirmed. "She's 83 now, but don't let that fool you. She could organize a parade on Mars if you gave her enough notice." As if summoned by their conversation, the front door opened with a cheerful jingle of sleigh bells, and a voice called out, "Christina, dear, I hope you have coffee ready." Liliana Chavez appeared in the breakfast room doorway, and Holly was amazed to see that she looked almost exactly the same as she had when Holly was a child. Tiny and energetic, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and bright blue eyes that missed nothing. She could have been anywhere from 60 to 90. "Holly Peterson!" Liliana exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "Look at you, all grown up and famous. I have every one of your albums, you know. That recording of Vivaldi's Winter made me cry the first time I heard it. Thank you, Mrs. Chavez. That means more to me than you know." "Oh, nonsense with the Mrs. Chavez. I've been Liliana to you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper." She settled into a chair across from Holly and accepted a cup of coffee from Christina. "Now, I understand you're working with young Jax Williams on saving our community center." Holly nearly laughed at hearing Jax described as young. He was only a year younger than she was, but she could see the genuine affection in Liliana's eyes. "We're exploring the possibility of collaboration," Holly said carefully. "Good. That boy has been a godsend to this community, you know. When he came back from Boston 5 years ago and opened that studio, half the teenagers in town suddenly developed an interest in music. He teaches them for free every Saturday morning." This was news to Holly. "He teaches music?" "Oh, yes. And not just electronic music either. Piano, guitar, music theory, composition." Elise Hall, you remember Tom and Martha's youngest daughter, she's applying to music schools now because of Jax's encouragement. Never would have happened otherwise. Holly felt a strange twist in her stomach. The Jax Williams she remembered from high school had barely been able to sit still through music class, let alone teach it. He's also the one who organized the fundraiser last spring when Reed Gomez's family lost their house in that fire, Christina added, settling down with her own coffee. Raised $12,000 in 2 weeks with a series of benefit concerts. "I had no idea," Holly murmured. "Well, you wouldn't, would you?" Liliana said kindly. "You've been off conquering the world, just like you always said you would." But Jack stayed here and helped build the community he wanted to live in. There was no judgment in her tone, but Holly still felt a pang of something that might have been guilt. She'd always been proud of pursuing her dreams beyond Carolton's borders, but she'd never really considered what she might have contributed if she'd stayed. "The important thing," Liliana continued, "is that you're both here now, and you both care about saving the center. The rest will work itself out." Holly wasn't so sure about that, but she nodded anyway. "Speaking of which," she said, checking her watch, "I should probably head over there. We're supposed to start working at 10. "Oh, you'll find Jax there already," Liliana said with a knowing smile. "He's been there since 7, setting up equipment and fine-tuning everything. That boy doesn't do anything halfway." Sure enough, when Holly arrived at the community center, she could hear music spilling out into the morning air. Not the electronic beats from the night before, but something softer and more acoustic. She pushed through the front doors and found Jax sitting at an upright piano in the corner of the room, playing a gentle version of "O Holy Night" that made the old instrument sound like it had been voiced by angels. He was completely absorbed in the music, his eyes closed, and his hands moving with a fluidity that spoke of years of practice and natural talent. Holly stood in the doorway for several minutes, just listening. This wasn't the casual strumming she remembered from high school. This was sophisticated, nuanced playing that rivaled anything she'd heard from her conservatory-trained colleagues. When the last note faded, she found herself applauding softly. Jax looked up, startled, then smiled. "Good morning. I was just warming up the room. How long have you been playing like that?" Holly asked, walking over to the piano. "Like what? Like a real pianist?" Jax laughed. "As opposed to a fake pianist?" "I've been playing since I was 7, Holly. Just because I didn't show off in high school doesn't mean I wasn't serious about music." Holly felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I didn't mean to imply—" "It's okay," Jax said easily. "I know how I came across back then. I was more interested in being cool than in demonstrating my musical knowledge. Different priorities." He stood up from the piano bench and gestured toward his electronic setup, which had been expanded overnight. "I thought we could start simple today. Maybe just piano and violin. See how our styles naturally complement each other before we add any electronic elements." Holly nodded, relieved. This felt more like familiar territory. She opened her violin case and spent a few minutes tuning and warming up with scales, very aware of Jax listening to her technique. "What would you like to start with?" she asked. "How about Silent Night, the traditional version, no modifications?" Holly positioned her violin and waited for Jax to establish the key and tempo on the piano. When he began to play, she was struck again by the sophistication of his arrangement. It wasn't just a simple melody line. He was creating harmonic textures that supported and enhanced her violin without overwhelming it. She came in with the melody line and immediately felt something click into place. Jax seemed to anticipate her musical instincts, following her subtle tempo changes and dynamic shifts as if they'd been playing together for years. When she added embellishments to the melody, he adjusted his harmonies to highlight them. When she pulled back for a more intimate moment, his piano became softer and more spacious. Holly lowered her violin, trying to find the right words. "Yeah," Jax agreed, his hands still resting on the piano keys. "It was." They looked at each other for a moment, and Holly felt something shift in the air between them. This wasn't just about saving the community center anymore. This was about the pure joy of making music with someone who understood. "Let's try another one," she said quickly. They moved through several traditional carols, each one feeling more natural than the last. Holly found herself relaxing into the collaboration, trusting Jax to support her musical choices while adding his own creative interpretations. He had an intuitive understanding of when to lead and when to follow, when to complement her melody, and when to create counterpoint that challenged and inspired her. "Okay," Jax said after they'd finished a particularly beautiful version of the first Noel. "Are you ready to try adding some electronic elements?" Holly hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Show me what you had in mind." Jax moved to his electronic setup and began layering in subtle textures, a gentle reverb that made the room sound like a cathedral, some soft percussion that felt like a heartbeat rather than a drum set, harmonies that seemed to float in the air around their acoustic instruments. "Now play," he said. Holly lifted her violin and began oh come, Emmanuel," one of her favorite carols. As the melody soared, Jax's electronic elements wrapped around it like a warm embrace, creating an atmosphere that was both ancient and modern, traditional and innovative. It was unlike anything Holly had ever experienced. The electronic elements didn't compete with her violin. They amplified its emotional impact, creating a sonic landscape that made the familiar carol feel like a revelation. "Oh my God," she breathed when they finished. "Right?" Jax's eyes were bright with excitement. "This is what I was trying to show you yesterday. We're not changing the music, we're unveiling it." Holly sat down heavily in one of the folding chairs, her mind racing. This could actually work. It could be incredible, Jax agreed. But only if we're both completely committed to it. This kind of collaboration requires trust. The word hung between them, loaded with years of history and misunderstanding. Holly realized that she'd never really trusted Jax in high school. She'd seen him as someone who didn't take things seriously, who might let her down when it mattered most. "I want to try something," she said suddenly. "Can you follow my lead completely? Just react to what I'm playing without any predetermined plan?" "Absolutely." Holly stood up and began playing an improvised melody, something she was making up on the spot that started with fragments of Silent Night, but wandered into entirely new territory. It was risky. Improvisation wasn't her strong suit, and she could easily embarrass herself. But Jax followed her musical instincts perfectly, adding harmonic support when she needed it, staying silent when her melody needed space to breathe, creating electronic textures that enhanced the mood she was establishing. When she took the melody into minor keys, his harmonies became more complex and mysterious. When she returned to major keys with a burst of joy, his supporting elements became brighter and more celebratory. By the time they finished, Holly was laughing with pure delight. "How did you know where I was going with that?" "I didn't even know where I was going with that. I just listened," Jax said simply. "You have very clear musical instincts. Once I learned to hear them, following was easy." Holly felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of playing. When was the last time someone had really listened to her music, rather than simply evaluating her technique? We should probably talk about the program for the actual concert, she said, trying to regain some professional distance. Good idea. I brought coffee and pastries from Watson's Bakery, Jack said, gesturing toward a table near the windows where Holly could see white boxes and a thermos. Watson Rodriguez had taken over the bakery from his father 3 years earlier, and his morning pastries were legendary throughout the county. Holly accepted a bear claw and coffee that was even better than Christina's, then settled into planning mode. How many pieces do you think we should plan? She asked, pulling out a notebook. Probably 10 or 12, with the concert running about 90 minutes including an intermission. That gives us time to build an emotional arc without losing the audience's attention. Holly was impressed by his practical knowledge of concert programming. What kind of arc were you thinking? Start with something familiar and welcoming. Build to more complex and exciting pieces in the first half, then come back after intermission with something intimate and personal, before ending with a big finale that brings everyone together. That makes sense. What would you choose for the opening? They spent the next 2 hours mapping out a potential program, and Holly was continually surprised by Jax's musical knowledge and thoughtful approach to audience engagement. He suggested including one piece that featured local children's voices, another that highlighted community members with special musical talents, and a segment where they could invite audience participation. It's not just about the music, he explained. It's about creating an experience that reminds people why this community center matters, why this town is worth fighting for. You really love this place, don't you? Holly asked. Jax was quiet for a moment, looking around the old building. I traveled a lot after college. Lived in Boston for 3 years, spent time in Nashville and Austin working with different artists. I saw some incredible cities, worked in some amazing studios, but I never found anywhere that felt like home the way Carolton does. There's something special about a place where people know your name, where your success matters to your neighbors, where you can actually make a difference in people's lives. Holly thought about her apartment in Manhattan, where she'd lived for 5 years without learning the names of anyone in her building. Don't you ever feel limited here? I used to think I would, but creativity isn't about having unlimited options. It's about finding infinite possibilities within constraints. Some of my best work has come from trying to solve problems specific to this community. Before Holly could respond, the front door opened and a small tornado of energy burst into the room. Mr. Jax! Mr. Jax! A girl who looked to be about 8 years old ran toward them, her blonde pigtails flying behind her. She was followed by a slightly older boy, who wore the expression of someone trying to keep up with a force of nature. Elise? Marcus? Jack stood up with a genuine smile. What brings you two here on a Saturday morning? Mama said you might be here with the famous violin lady, Elise announced, then turned to Holly with wide blue eyes. Are you really famous? Like on TV famous? Holly couldn't help but smile. I'm Holly, and I'm famous to about 12 people, most of whom are over 60 and attend classical music concerts. That's still famous, Marcus said seriously. He appeared to be about 10, with dark hair and solemn brown eyes. Our music teacher showed us one of your videos on YouTube. You play really fast. Sometimes, Holly agreed. Do you two play instruments? Mr. Jax is teaching me piano, Elise said proudly, and Marcus plays guitar. We're going to be in the Christmas concert. Holly looked at Jax questioningly. I was going to mention that, he said. Several of the kids I teach have been preparing pieces for the concert. They could be part of our community showcase segment. Can we show her? Elise asked, bouncing on her toes. If it's okay with Holly, Jax said. Holly found herself nodding, curious to see Jax in his teaching role. The next 20 minutes were a revelation. Jax worked with the children with patience and enthusiasm that transformed their simple pieces into something genuinely moving. He encouraged Elise's exuberant personality while helping her focus on musicality. And he drew Marcus out of his shell by showing him how his careful, precise playing style could be a strength rather than a limitation. When they finished their mini performance, Holly applauded enthusiastically. That was wonderful. You should both be very proud. Will you play something for us? Marcus asked shyly. Holly looked at Jax, who nodded encouragingly. She picked up her violin and played a simplified version of Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, watching the children's faces as the melody filled the room. When she finished, Elise was practically vibrating with excitement. "Can you teach me to play like that?" "It takes a lot of practice," Holly said gently. "Years and years of practice." "I don't mind practicing," Elise said seriously. "Mr. Jack says practice is just playing the same thing over and over until it becomes magic." Holly felt something catch in her throat. When was the last time she'd thought of practice as creating magic rather than just maintaining technique? After the children left, with promises that they'd see Holly at the next rehearsal, she and Jax continued working on their program. But Holly found herself distracted, thinking about Elise's enthusiasm and Marcus's determination. "They really love music," she said during a break. "They really love learning," Jax corrected. "Music just happens to be the vehicle. That's what I've learned from teaching. Kids don't care about perfection or technical mastery. They care about connection and expression, and the feeling of creating something beautiful." Holly thought about her own musical education, which had been focused on achieving technical excellence from a very young age. She'd been encouraged to practice until she could play the most difficult pieces flawlessly, but she couldn't remember many conversations about what the music meant or how it made her feel. "Do you think we're making a mistake?" she asked suddenly. "With what?" "This whole collaboration. What if we're overthinking it? What if we should just keep things simple and traditional?" Jack set down his coffee and looked at her seriously. "Holly, what made you fall in love with music?" "I told you yesterday." "No, I mean really fall in love with it. The moment when you knew you couldn't live without it." Holly closed her eyes and thought back. "I was 7 years old, sitting right here in this room during a Christmas Eve concert. Mrs. Patterson was playing a violin solo. I think it was Ave Maria. And I remember thinking that if angels had voices, that's what they would sound like. I wanted to be able to create that feeling for other people. And do you? Create that feeling when you perform now?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Holly opened her eyes and stared at Jax, unable to answer. "I'm not criticizing your music," he said gently. "Your technical skill is incredible, and your interpretations are sophisticated and nuanced. But when was the last time you played something that surprised you? That made you feel like you were discovering the music for the first time?" Holly thought about the previous evening's performance at Lincoln Center. Technically perfect, professionally executed, emotionally safe. "I don't remember," she admitted quietly. "Then maybe this collaboration isn't about saving the community center," Jack said. "Maybe it's about saving your relationship with music." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of that observation settling between them. Finally, Holly stood up and reached for her violin. "Play Silent Night again," she said, "but this time, let's see if we can surprise ourselves." Jack smiled and moved to his electronic setup. "I thought you'd never ask." Hashtag Chapter 3, Christmas Magic Begins. Over the next few days, Holly fell into a rhythm that felt more natural than anything she'd experienced in years. Mornings were spent at the community center with Jax, working through their expanding repertoire and refining the electronic arrangements that seemed to unlock new possibilities in familiar carols. Afternoons, she explored Carolton, reacquainting herself with her hometown and discovering how much it had changed and how much it had stayed the same. The town was preparing for its annual Christmas festival, and everywhere Holly looked, she saw evidence of community spirit that warmed her heart. Neighbors were helping neighbors hang lights, local businesses were decorating their storefronts with increasing creativity, and every conversation seemed to include mentions of the upcoming concert and hopes for saving the community center. She'd started taking her violin with her on these afternoon walks, and somehow she kept finding herself playing impromptu mini-concerts. At the farmer's market, she joined a group of local musicians for an informal jam session that had drawn a crowd of 50 people. At the elementary school, she'd visited Marcus and Elise's music class and ended up staying for 2 hours, helping the teacher introduce children to classical music. Each of these interactions reminded her why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place: the way it could bring people together, create moments of shared joy, and express emotions that words couldn't capture. On Wednesday afternoon, she was walking past the town's small park when she heard her name being called. Christina was hurrying toward her, bundled in a red wool coat and carrying what appeared to be several bolts of fabric. Holly, perfect timing. Can you help me with something? Of course. What's all this? Decorations for the Christmas Eve concert. Liliana has this vision for transforming the community center into a winter wonderland. But we need to figure out how to do it without interfering with your musical equipment. Holly found herself being led back toward the community center, where they discovered Jax and Liliana deep in conversation over what appeared to be architectural drawings of the building. Holly, dear. Liliana looked up with a smile. We were just discussing the staging for the concert. Jax has some wonderful ideas about how to arrange everything. The main challenge, Jax explained, spreading the drawings on a table, is creating enough space for the electronic equipment, while still leaving room for traditional Christmas decorations and audience seating. Holly studied the layout, impressed by the level of detail Jax had put into the planning. He'd marked sightlines, acoustic considerations, and traffic flow patterns that would ensure both optimal sound quality and audience comfort. What if we elevated the performance area slightly? She suggested, pointing to the front of the room. That would give us more space for equipment underneath while improving visibility for the audience. Brilliant! Liliana clapped her hands together. And we could drape the platform with these silver and gold fabrics to create something truly magical. We'd need to be careful about fabric placement, Jax noted. Some of these electronic components generate heat, and we can't have anything flammable too close to them. What about a combination of fabric and lights? Christina suggested. We could create panels that incorporate LED strands. They don't generate heat, and they could create a really stunning effect behind the performers. For the next 2 hours, the four of them worked together to design a staging concept that balanced practical needs with Christmas magic. Holly was struck by how naturally they functioned as a team, each person contributing expertise while remaining open to the other's ideas. You know, she said as they were finishing up, we should probably do a tech rehearsal with all these decorations in place before the actual concert. Good thinking, Jax agreed. What about this Saturday? That gives us time to get everything set up and still leaves a week for adjustments. Perfect, Liliana said. I'll organize the decoration committee. Christina, can you handle coordinating with the festival volunteers? Absolutely. And Holly, would you be available Friday evening to help with setup? We could use your input on the final placement. Holly nodded, feeling a warm sense of belonging that she hadn't experienced in years. In New York, her professional relationships were exactly that, professional. People worked together efficiently and skillfully, but there was rarely this sense of shared investment in creating something meaningful for their community. Oh, and Holly, Liliana added with a mischievous twinkle in her eye, I hope you'll join us for the tree lighting ceremony tomorrow evening. It's a town tradition, and I think it would mean a lot to people to see you there. Holly had completely forgotten about the tree lighting ceremony, a charming tradition where the entire town gathered in the central square to watch the lighting of a massive Christmas tree, followed by caroling and hot chocolate. As a child, she'd looked forward to it every year. I'd love to, she said, realizing she meant it. Wonderful. Jax, you're bringing your guitar, aren't you? Wouldn't miss it, he confirmed. As they were packing up the planning materials, Jax fell into step beside Holly. Want to grab dinner? He asked casually. I know a place that has the best comfort food in 3 counties. Holly hesitated for just a moment. This felt like crossing a line from professional collaboration into something more personal. But then she realized they'd already crossed that line. Somewhere in the past few days, Jax had become more than just a musical partner. That sounds great, she said. The place turned out to be a cozy restaurant called Murphy's Tavern, tucked into a restored Victorian house on a quiet side street. The interior was all exposed brick walls, dark wood beams, and tables lit by candles in mason jars. Christmas garland was draped along the bar, and a fire crackled in a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. This is adorable, Holly said, as they were seated at a corner table near the fireplace. Reed Gomez opened it about 3 years ago, Jax explained. He's a trained chef who decided to come back to Carolton and create something special for the community. Holly remembered Reed as a quiet kid who'd been a year ahead of her in school. Seems like a lot of people have come home to Carolton, or stayed and built something worth staying for, Jack said. Sometimes the best adventures happen in your own backyard. They ordered. Holly chose something called comfort carbonara that turned out to be the most delicious pasta dish she'd ever tasted, while Jack's went with braised short ribs that smelled incredible. The conversation flowed as easily as the wine Jax had selected, covering everything from their musical training to their favorite books to their most embarrassing high school memories. I have to ask, Holly said over dessert, a shared chocolate lava cake that was sinfully good. What made you decide to become a DJ? That seems like such a departure from classical training. Jack smiled, and for a moment he looked like the mischievous teenager she remembered. You really want to know? I really want to know. It was because of you, actually. Holly nearly choked on her wine. Because of me? Remember junior year, when you performed that Mozart concerto at the spring concert? Holly nodded. It had been one of her finest high school performances, a technically challenging piece that she'd worked on for months. I was sitting in the back row, and I was absolutely blown away by your skill and dedication. But I was also intimidated, I guess. You represented this level of musical excellence that felt completely out of reach for someone like me. Someone like you? Someone who learned music by ear instead of from sheet music. Someone who was more interested in creating new sounds than perfecting old ones. Someone who wanted to make music that made people dance rather than sit quietly in appreciation. Holly felt a pang of sadness. I never meant to make anyone feel intimidated. Of course you didn't, and it wasn't really about you. It was about my own insecurities. But it made me realize that if I was going to be serious about music, I needed to find my own path, rather than trying to follow someone else's. So you became a DJ. I became a DJ because electronic music let me experiment and create without needing to match traditional standards. I could layer sounds that had never been combined before, manipulate familiar melodies in ways that revealed new possibilities, and create experiences that were immediate and visceral. Holly thought about this, swirling the last of her wine in her glass. But you're classically trained too. All that piano technique didn't come from nowhere. My grandmother taught me piano from the time I was 5, Jax admitted. She was a church organist, very traditional, very disciplined. I owe everything I know about music theory and composition to her foundation. Why didn't you ever let people know that in high school? Jax was quiet for a moment, studying the candle flame between them. Because I was 17 years old and more concerned with being cool than being authentic. I thought if people knew I spent hours practicing scales and studying Bach, it would somehow diminish my credibility as someone who was creating something new. And now I realize that the best innovation comes from understanding tradition well enough to build on it thoughtfully. He looked up at her. Which is why this collaboration with you feels so right. We're not rejecting classical music or electronic music, we're finding ways to honor both while creating something entirely new. Holly felt warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the wine. Can I tell you something? Anything. Working with you this week has been the most fun I've had making music in. I don't know how long, maybe ever. Jax's smile could have lit up the entire restaurant. Really? Really. I'd forgotten that music could be playful and experimental and surprising. I'd gotten so focused on perfection that I'd lost sight of joy. Well, we're just getting started, Jax said, reaching across the table to touch her hand briefly. Wait until you see what we're going to create for the actual concert. The simple contact sent an electric current through Holly that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with the way Jax was looking at her in the candlelight. For a moment, she forgot about professional boundaries and community obligations and the complicated question of what she was going to do after Christmas. We should probably head back, she said reluctantly, glancing at her watch. Early rehearsal tomorrow. Right, Jax agreed, but he made no move to signal for the check. They sat in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, the fire crackling beside them and the sounds of other diners creating a warm backdrop. Holly realized she didn't want the evening to end, not just because she was enjoying Jax's company, but because this felt like the kind of perfect moment that she'd forgotten could exist outside of carefully orchestrated performance settings. Finally, Jax flagged down their server, insisting on paying despite Holly's protests. As they walked back toward the town center where their cars were parked, fresh snow began to fall, creating a magical atmosphere that belonged in a Christmas movie. "Holly," Jax said as they reached her rental car, "I'm really glad you came home." "Me too," she said, and was surprised by how much she meant it. "See you tomorrow?" "Wouldn't miss it." Holly drove back to the inn through snow that was falling more heavily now, coating the tree branches and making everything look pristine and new. She was humming one of their experimental arrangements when she realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about her next professional obligation or worrying about maintaining her career trajectory. She was simply happy. The tree lighting ceremony the next evening exceeded all of Holly's childhood memories. The entire town seemed to have turned out. Families bundled in warm coats and scarves. Children running between the adults with excitement. Teenagers pretending to be too cool while secretly enjoying themselves. And elderly residents sharing stories and laughter. The tree itself was magnificent. At least 20 feet tall, perfectly shaped, and decorated with thousands of white lights that would be revealed when the mayor threw the switch. Local businesses had set up booths around the square, offering hot chocolate, roasted chestnuts, homemade cookies, and Christmas crafts. Holly found herself swept into the celebration, accepting hugs from former classmates she hadn't seen in years, meeting spouses and children who been born since she left town, and listening to updates on lives that had unfolded while she was pursuing her dreams in distant cities. "Holly Peterson, is that really you?" She turned to find Tom Hall approaching with a woman who must be his wife and a girl who looked familiar. "Tom, yes, it's really me." They embraced warmly. "And this must be Elise," she said, smiling at the blonde girl who was practically bouncing with excitement. "You remember me?" Elise beamed. "Of course I remember you. You're one of my favorite pianists." "This is my wife, Sarah," Tom said, introducing a kind-faced woman with laugh lines around her eyes. "And our oldest, Marcus, is around here somewhere, probably trying to avoid being seen with his family." "Holly's working with Jax on the Christmas concert," Elise informed her parents importantly. "They're going to save the community center." "We're certainly going to try," Holly said. "We can't thank you enough for what you're doing," Sarah said sincerely. "That building holds so many memories for all of us. Tom and I had our wedding reception there, Elise took her first dance classes there, Marcus learned to play basketball in the gymnasium. It's where our community comes together," Tom added. "Without it, we'd lose something essential." Before Holly could respond, the crowd began moving toward the center of the square, where Mayor Patricia Hendricks was preparing to begin the ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen, families and friends," the mayor's voice carried clearly across the square, "welcome to Carolton's annual tree lighting ceremony." The crowd cheered, and Holly found herself grinning at the enthusiasm. "Before we light our beautiful tree, I'd like to acknowledge some special guests who are helping us celebrate this season." The mayor gestured toward Holly. "Many of you know that our own Holly Peterson has returned home to help save our beloved community center through a very special Christmas Eve concert." More cheering, and Holly felt her cheeks warm as people turned to look at her and applaud. "Holly, would you like to say a few words?" Holly hadn't expected to be put on the spot, but she found herself stepping forward. "Thank you, Mayor Hendricks. I just want to say that being back in Carolton this week has reminded me why this community is so special. The way you all support each other, the way you've maintained traditions while embracing change, the way you've created something beautiful and meaningful together. It's inspiring." She paused, looking around at the faces in the crowd. People she'd grown up with, people she was just meeting, children who represented the future of this town. The Christmas Eve concert isn't just about raising money for building repairs. It's about celebrating what makes Carolton special and ensuring that future generations can experience the same sense of community that shaped all of us. I'm honored to be part of that effort. The applause that followed was warm and sustained, and Holly felt a lump in her throat as she realized how much these people's approval meant to her. "And now," the mayor continued, "I'd like to invite our local musicians to lead us in some carols before we light the tree. Jax Williams, would you and your friends join us?" Jax appeared from somewhere in the crowd, carrying his guitar and wearing a Santa hat that should have looked ridiculous, but somehow looked charming. He was followed by several other local musicians Holly recognized from her afternoon jam session at the farmer's market. "Holly, bring your violin," he called out. "Let's give everyone a preview of what they can expect at the concert." Holly retrieved her violin from her car and joined the impromptu ensemble near the tree. They started with "O Come, All Ye Faithful," and soon the entire square was singing along, voices harmonizing naturally and joyfully. They moved through several carols, each one building the sense of community celebration. Holly found herself harmonizing with Jax's guitar, creating spontaneous arrangements that felt both traditional and fresh. When they began Silent Night, the snow that had been threatening all day finally began to fall in earnest, creating a scene so perfect it felt scripted. "Now that," Jax said quietly as the last note faded, "is what Christmas magic sounds like." "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor called out, "let's light up our Christmas." The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And suddenly, the tree burst into brilliant illumination, 20 feet of sparkling white lights that turned the falling snow into tiny diamonds. The crowd cheered and applauded, children gasped with delight, and Holly felt tears prick her eyes at the simple beauty of the moment. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Yes," Jax agreed, but when she looked over at him, he wasn't looking at the tree. After the ceremony, many people lingered in the square, reluctant to end the magical evening. Holly found herself in a dozen conversations about the upcoming concert, receiving encouragement and support that both thrilled and terrified her. The entire town seemed to be counting on their collaboration to save the community center. "No pressure," Jax said with a grin as they finally escaped to the relative quiet of Murphy's Tavern for a late dinner. "No pressure at all," Holly agreed, but she was smiling too. "Are you nervous about the concert?" he asked after they'd ordered. Holly considered the question seriously. "I should be. I'm always nervous before performances. But with this, I'm more excited than nervous. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense. When you know you're doing something meaningful, the nerves transform into energy." "Is that what happened to you when you decided to come back to Carolton? You transformed nerves into energy?" Jax nodded. "I was terrified that I'd made a mistake, that I'd be bored or frustrated, or that I wouldn't be able to make a living here. But I knew I wanted to build something meaningful rather than just advancing my career." "And you don't regret it?" "Not for a second. Though I have to admit, this week has made me realize how much I've missed having a true musical partner." Holly felt that electric current again, the one that seemed to appear whenever their conversation moved into personal territory. "Jax," she said carefully, "what happens after the concert?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, I have commitments in New York. Performances scheduled through next spring, recording sessions, obligations." "I know," he said quietly. "I wouldn't expect you to change your life because of 1 week in Maine." But something in his tone suggested that he might hope she would consider it. I don't want to create something beautiful and then walk away from it," she said. "Then don't. It's not that simple, isn't it?" Jax leaned forward. "Holly, when was the last time you felt this connected to your music? This excited about creating something new?" She couldn't answer, because the truth was that she'd never felt this connected to her music, or this excited about the possibilities of collaboration. "I'm not saying you should make any decisions tonight," Jax continued. "I'm just saying, maybe stay open to the possibility that there are different ways to build a meaningful musical career." Holly nodded, not trusting herself to speak, because the truth was she was already imagining what it might be like to stay in Carolton, to build something lasting with Jax, to be part of a community rather than just visiting it periodically for performances. But that would mean giving up everything she'd worked for, everything she'd achieved. Wouldn't it? Chapter 4. Deepening Connection. The next morning brought the first real technical rehearsal for the Christmas Eve concert, and Holly arrived at the community center to find it transformed. Liliana's decoration committee had been busy. Silver and gold fabric draped from the ceiling created an elegant canopy. LED light strands wove through evergreen garland along. The walls and the performance area had been elevated exactly as they'd planned. with a backdrop that looked like something from a professional concert venue. "This is incredible," Holly breathed, setting down her violin case and looking around in amazement. "Wait until you see it with the full lighting setup," said a voice behind her. She turned to find Jax emerging from behind the stage area, wearing jeans and a sweater that somehow made him look both approachable and professional. Christina's husband turns out to be something of a lighting designer. Christina's husband? Miguel Ramirez. He works for a production company in Burlington, but he's volunteering his expertise for the concert. "Come see what he's created." Jax led her backstage, where a complex array of lighting equipment had been set up. Miguel was adjusting something on a control board, his concentration absolute. "Miguel, meet Holly Peterson." "Holly, Miguel Ramirez, the man who's going to make us look like rock stars." Miguel looked up with a smile and extended his hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Holly. I've heard your recordings, and I'm excited to see what you and Jax create together." "What kind of lighting are you planning?" Holly asked. "Nothing too dramatic," Miguel assured her. "The goal is to enhance the musical experience without overwhelming it. Soft color washes that respond to the mood of each piece, some subtle movement during instrumental sections, and a few special effects for the finale." "Can you show us a sample?" "Absolutely." "Jax, want to play something so Holly can see the full effect?" Jax moved to his setup and began playing their arrangement of "Oh Holy Night," the one that had become their signature piece, blending traditional melody with electronic textures that seemed to expand the emotional range of the familiar carol. As the music began, the lighting slowly shifted from warm white to deep blue, creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and transcendent. When Jax added harmonic layers, subtle spotlights highlighted different areas of the stage, and when the melody soared, the entire space seemed to glow with soft golden light. "Wow," Holly said when the music ended. "It's like the lighting is another instrument." "That's exactly what we were going for," Miguel said with satisfaction. "Music is about creating an emotional journey, and lighting can amplify that journey without calling attention to itself." "We should run through the entire program with full tech," Jack suggested. "Get comfortable with how everything works together." For the next 3 hours, they worked through every piece they'd planned for the concert, fine-tuning the balance between acoustic instruments, electronic elements, and lighting effects. Holly was amazed by how seamlessly everything integrated. What had started as an experimental collaboration between two very different musical approaches had evolved into something that felt cohesive and polished. "The transition between Silent Night and O Come All Ye Faithful needs work," she noted during a break. "Agreed." "What if we use a longer electronic bridge?" Jack suggested. "Something that maintains the intimate mood of Silent Night, but builds energy for the more celebratory opening of O Come. Can you play with that while I work on my bowing for the fast passage in the Bach piece?" They separated to practice individual elements, and Holly found herself marveling at how comfortable they'd become with each other's working methods. Jax needed to experiment and adjust until electronic textures felt exactly right, while she needed repetition and technical precision to ensure her playing would be flawless under pressure. Rather than conflicting, these approaches seemed to complement each other. "Holly?" Jax called out after about 20 minutes. "Can you come listen to this transition idea?" She joined him at his setup, and he played a bridge passage that was absolutely perfect. It captured the peaceful intimacy of Silent Night while gradually introducing rhythmic elements that would make the transition to O Come, All Ye Faithful feel natural and exciting. "That's exactly what we needed," she said, then impulsively leaned over and kissed his cheek. "You're brilliant." The simple gesture created a moment of sudden awareness between them. Holly realized she'd acted without thinking, responding to Jax as if they were longtime collaborators rather than recent partners. But rather than feeling awkward, it felt natural. "We work well together," Jax said quietly. "We do," Holly agreed, very aware that they were standing close enough for her to see flecks of gold in his brown eyes. The moment might have developed into something more significant, but the community center door opened with a bang, and Elise Hall came racing in, followed by Marcus and several other children. Are you practicing for the concert? Elise called out, her voice echoing in the large space. We are indeed, Holly said, stepping back from Jax and trying to regain her professional composure. What brings you all here on a Saturday? Mama said we could come watch rehearsal if we promised to be quiet, Marcus explained. We brought our instruments too, in case you want to practice our pieces. The children had indeed brought their instruments. Marcus with his guitar, Elise with a small keyboard, and 3 other students with various instruments, ranging from a violin to a set of bongos. Actually, Jack said, this might be perfect timing. We were just about to work on the community showcase segment. For the next hour, they worked with the children on their planned contributions to the concert. Each child had prepared a simple piece, but Jax helped them arrange their performances so they could play together, creating a mini ensemble that was both adorable and genuinely musical. Holly found herself moved by the children's enthusiasm and dedication. None of them were prodigies, but they all approached music with joy and curiosity that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with performance in the first place. Miss Holly, Elise said during a break, will you really go back to New York after Christmas? The question hit Holly like a surprise chord change. Well, I have performances scheduled, but couldn't you do performances here too? Marcus asked. Mr. Jax plays in lots of different places. It's more complicated than that, Holly said gently. I have a specific kind of career that requires me to be in certain places at certain times. But don't you like it here? Elise persisted. Holly looked around the community center, at the beautiful decorations, the professional equipment that had transformed the space, the children who were watching her with hope and curiosity, and realized she more than liked it here. She felt at home in a way she hadn't experienced in years. I do like it here, she said honestly. Very much. Then you should stay, Elise announced with the simple logic of childhood. If only it were that easy, Holly thought. That evening, Christina invited Holly to join her family for dinner, and Holly found herself at a cozy kitchen table with Christina, Miguel, and their twin boys who were 5 years old and absolutely convinced that Holly was some kind of celebrity. Are you really on TV? Asked Diego, the more outgoing of the twins. Sometimes, Holly said. But mostly I play concerts where people come to listen in person. Like the Christmas concert? Asked Carlos, who seemed to be the thoughtful twin. Exactly like the Christmas concert. Mama says you're helping save the building where we take swimming lessons, Diego said. The community center has a pool? Holly asked Christina, surprised. In the basement. It's not fancy, but it's where most of the kids in town learn to swim. The center offers after-school programs, senior citizen activities, community meetings, you name it. It really is the heart of the town. No pressure, Miguel said with a grin. Everyone keeps saying that, Holly laughed. But I'm definitely feeling the pressure. The whole town is counting on this concert. They're not just counting on the concert, Christina said seriously. They're counting on you and Jax proving that traditional and modern can work together, that the community can evolve without losing what makes it special. Holly thought about that as she helped clear the dinner table. The collaboration with Jax wasn't just about music. It was about finding ways to honor the past while embracing change, to maintain community values while adapting to new realities. Can I ask you something? She said to Christina as they loaded the dishwasher. Do you ever regret staying in Carolton? Don't you wonder what might have happened if you'd moved to a bigger city and pursued different opportunities? Christina was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. I think there's a difference between staying because you're afraid to leave and staying because you've found something worth building. I stayed because I discovered I could create the life I wanted right here. But weren't you worried about limiting your options? I was terrified, Christina admitted. But I also realized that having unlimited options doesn't necessarily make you happier. Sometimes it just makes you paralyzed by choice. I found that when I committed to building something meaningful in one place, with one community, my life became richer rather than more limited. Holly nodded, but she wasn't sure she was convinced. Her entire career had been built on the idea that success meant expanding opportunities, reaching larger audiences, achieving recognition on a national and international level. Besides, Christina added with a smile, who says you have to choose between Carolton and the rest of the world? Maybe the question isn't whether to stay or go, but how to create a life that includes the best of both. That evening, Holly sat in her room at the inn, looking out at the snow-covered mountains and thinking about Christina's words. On her phone, she had 17 missed calls from her manager, 12 from her booking agent, and 43 emails related to upcoming performances and professional obligations. But she also had a program for the Christmas Eve concert that excited her more than anything she'd worked on in years, and a musical partnership that felt like the beginning of something important rather than just another professional collaboration. Her phone rang, and she saw Jax's name on the display. "Hi," she answered. "Hi. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. I was just thinking about how much my life has changed in the past week, in a good way or a concerning way." Holly smiled at the carefully neutral tone in his voice, in a way that's both exciting and terrifying. "Those are usually the best kinds of changes," Jax said. "Listen, I was wondering if you'd like to do something tomorrow that has nothing to do with the concert." "Like what?" "Cross-country skiing. The trails up at Mountain View are supposed to be perfect this weekend, and I thought you might enjoy seeing some of the countryside." Holly realized she hadn't done anything purely recreational since arriving in Carolton. Every activity had been connected to the concert or to reconnecting with the community. "That sounds wonderful," she said. "I should warn you, though, I haven't been on skis in about 10 years. Don't worry, I'll start you on the easy trails. And if you hate it, we can always go back to my studio and work on music." "Your studio?" "We've been rehearsing at the community center. My actual studio is in my house. It's where I do most of my composition and recording work. I thought you might like to see it." Holly felt that now familiar flutter of anticipation. "I'd like that very much." "Great. I'll pick you up at 10. After they hung up, Holly sat for a long time looking out at the winter landscape. Tomorrow would be her first full day in Carolton that wasn't focused on solving problems or meeting obligations. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she was going to spend a day simply enjoying herself. The thought was both liberating and slightly frightening. Chapter 5. Falling in Love. The morning dawned clear and crisp, with fresh snow sparkling like crystal under brilliant blue skies. Holly felt her spirits lift as soon as she stepped outside the inn and saw Jax waiting beside a jeep, loaded with ski equipment, wearing a navy blue jacket that made his eyes look even warmer than usual. "Perfect day for skiing," he said, opening the passenger door for her. "The weather forecast says we'll have sunshine and temperatures just below freezing, ideal conditions." "I can't remember the last time I did something just for fun," Holly admitted as they drove toward the mountains. "My schedule is usually so packed that recreational activities feel like a luxury I can't afford." "That's exactly why recreational activities are essential," Jax said. "Creativity requires space to breathe, time to absorb new experiences and perspectives. Some of my best musical ideas come when I'm not actively trying to create music." The drive to Mountain View took them through countryside that belonged in a Christmas postcard. Rolling hills covered in pristine snow, farmhouses with smoke curling from chimneys, pine forests that looked like nature's own Christmas trees. Holly found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't experienced in months, simply enjoying the scenery and Jax's easy conversation. The ski lodge was charming, a rustic building with a large stone fireplace, hot chocolate bar, and equipment rental area staffed by cheerful locals who clearly knew Jax well. "Hey, Jax," called out a woman behind the rental counter. "Back for your weekly adventure?" "Weekly?" Holly asked as they collected their equipment. "I try to get out here every Sunday during ski season," Jax explained. "It's part of my mental health routine, time in nature, physical activity, and complete disconnection from electronic devices." "No phones on the trails?" "No phones on the trails," he confirmed. "Part of the point is being completely present in the moment." Holly felt a moment of panic at the idea of being unreachable for several hours, then realized how telling that reaction was. When had she become so dependent on constant connectivity? "That sounds liberating, actually," she said. They started on a gentle trail that wound through snow-laden pine trees, and Holly was surprised by how quickly her muscle memory returned. Within a few minutes, she was gliding smoothly beside Jax, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air and her cheeks stinging pleasantly from the wind. "This is incredible," she said as they paused at an overlook that provided sweeping views of the valley below. "I'd forgotten how peaceful winter sports can be. There's something about the rhythm of skiing that's similar to music," Jax observed. "Finding your flow, adjusting to the terrain, becoming part of a larger natural rhythm." They skied for 2 hours, stopping occasionally to admire the scenery or to help Holly navigate a more challenging section of trail. Jax was a patient and encouraging guide, offering technique suggestions without ever making her feel self-conscious about her rusty skills. "Ready for a longer trail?" he asked as they returned to the lodge for a hot chocolate break. "How much longer?" "About an hour, but it ends at a place I think you'll love," Holly agreed, and they set off on a trail that led deeper into the forest. This path was more challenging, with gentle hills and turns that required focus and skill, but Holly found herself falling into the meditative rhythm Jax had described. Her world narrowed to the sensation of skis gliding over snow, the sound of wind in the pine trees, and the comfortable presence of Jax skiing beside her. The trail emerged at a clearing that took Holly's breath away. They were on a ridge overlooking a pristine valley, with mountains stretching to the horizon in every direction. The only sounds were the whisper of wind and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. "It's magnificent," Holly whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might break the spell. "This is my thinking place," Jax said, pulling off his gloves and reaching for a thermos in his backpack. "When I need to make important decisions or work through creative challenges, I come here." He poured hot tea from the thermos and handed her a cup, and they stood in comfortable silence, absorbing the beauty of the winter landscape. "Jax," Holly said finally, "can I ask you something personal?" "Anything." "Have you ever been in love? I mean, really in love? The kind that makes you think about changing your entire life?" Jax was quiet for so long that Holly wondered if she'd overstepped some boundary. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and thoughtful. "Once. Her name was Rachel, and we met when I was living in Boston. She was a singer-songwriter, incredibly talented, and we collaborated on several projects." Holly felt an unexpected stab of jealousy. "What happened?" "She got offered a recording contract in Nashville, and I was offered a position with a production company in Los Angeles. We both thought our careers were more important than our relationship." "Do you regret that decision?" "I regret that we didn't even try to make it work. We just assumed it was impossible and walked away from something that might have been extraordinary." He looked at Holly directly. "I promised myself I wouldn't make that mistake again." The words hung between them, loaded with implication. Holly felt her heart rate increase, and not from the physical exertion of skiing. "What about you?" Jax asked. "Ever been in love?" Holly thought about her dating history. A series of relationships with fellow musicians or arts professionals that had been pleasant but never transformative. None of them had ever made her question her priorities or imagine a different kind of life. "I thought I was. A few times. But looking back, I think I was more in love with the idea of being in love than with the actual people." "And now?" Holly looked at Jax, at his wind-reddened cheeks and the way his hair curled slightly under his knit cap, at the way he was watching her with an expression of hopeful vulnerability, and realized that this conversation wasn't theoretical anymore. "Now I think I'm beginning to understand the difference," she said quietly. They finished their tea in silence, but it was a charged silence full of awareness and possibility. When they began the ski back to the lodge, Holly felt like everything had shifted between them, even though nothing explicit had been said. That afternoon, Jax took Holly to his house, a beautifully restored farmhouse about 10 minutes outside of town, surrounded by snow-covered fields and mature maple trees. The interior was a perfect blend of rustic charm and modern comfort, with exposed beam ceilings, hardwood floors, and furniture that looked both comfortable and sophisticated. "This is gorgeous," Holly said, looking around the main living area. "Did you restore it yourself?" "With a lot of help from friends and contractors," Jax admitted. "It took 3 years to get it exactly right, but I wanted to create a space that felt both inspiring and peaceful." He led her through the house, pointing out details like the kitchen island made from reclaimed barn wood and the bathroom tiles that had been handcrafted by a local artist. Every element showed thoughtful consideration and attention to quality. "The studio is in here," he said, opening a door that led to what had probably once been a formal dining room. Holly stepped inside and gasped. The room had been acoustically treated with elegant wood panels that looked like art installations, and it contained an impressive array of professional recording equipment. Multiple keyboards, guitars, and a computer setup that belonged in a major recording studio. "This is incredible, Jax. You could record anything in here." "That's the idea. I work with artists from all over New England, and this gives me the flexibility to create exactly the sound each project needs." Holly moved around the room, examining the various instruments and equipment. "Can you show me how you create those electronic textures we've been using in our arrangements?" For the next hour, Jax walked her through his creative process, demonstrating how he layered different electronic elements to create the atmospheric backgrounds that had become integral to their collaboration. Holly was fascinated by the technical complexity and artistic sophistication of what he was doing. "It's like painting with sound," she said, watching him manipulate a melody line with effects that made it seem to float in three-dimensional space. "Exactly. And the best part is that every effect can be fine-tuned in real time during a performance, so the music can respond to the energy of the audience and the mood of the moment." "Show me something you've never played for anyone else," Holly requested impulsively. Jax looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He thought for a moment, then moved to his main keyboard and began playing something that was unlike anything Holly had heard from him before. It was complex and emotional, combining classical harmonies with modern electronic textures, building from intimate passages to soaring climaxes that made Holly's chest tighten with emotion. When the piece ended, Holly realized she had tears in her eyes. "That was extraordinary." "What is it?" "Something I've been working on for the past 2 years. I call it Seasons of Home. It's a musical portrait of what it feels like to belong somewhere." "Why haven't you shared it with anyone?" Jax was quiet for a moment, because it felt too personal, I guess. Too revealing. Would you consider incorporating some of it into our Christmas concert?" "Really? Really?" It captures something essential about what we're trying to achieve. The idea that innovation and tradition can create something beautiful together. Jax smiled, and Holly realized that sharing his most personal music with her had been a gesture of trust that went far beyond their professional collaboration. "There's something else I want to show you," he said, moving to a different area of the studio. He pulled out a folder of sheet music and handed it to Holly. As she looked through the pages, she realized it was an arrangement of several traditional Christmas carols, but written specifically for violin and electronic accompaniment. "When did you write this?" she asked, amazed by the sophisticated notation and thoughtful musical choices. "This week, I've been working on it every night after our rehearsals, trying to create something that would showcase your classical training while integrating with electronic elements." Holly studied the music more carefully. It was technically challenging but not showily difficult, with passages that would allow her to demonstrate both precision and emotional expression. More importantly, it was written with obvious knowledge of her playing style and musical preferences. "This is beautiful, Jax, and it's clearly written by someone who really understands both classical composition and electronic music. Do you think we could use it as our finale piece?" Holly looked at the final page, which showed a dramatic conclusion that would be both musically satisfying and emotionally powerful. "I think it would be perfect," she said, "but it's going to require some serious practice to get the technical passages exactly right." "We have a week," Jax said, "and I happen to know a very talented violinist who isn't afraid of hard work." Holly laughed and moved to get her violin from its case. "Let's start now." They spent the rest of the afternoon working on the new piece, and Holly was amazed by how naturally it came together. Jax's arrangement seemed to anticipate her musical instincts, providing electronic support exactly when she needed it, and leaving space for her to shine during the violin showcases. "This is going to be incredible," at the concert, she said during a break. The audience won't know what hit them. Speaking of the audience, Jack said, Santino called this morning. Ticket sales are going really well. We're already at 250, and he thinks we'll easily sell out. That's wonderful news. Holly felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nervousness, but it also means we need to be absolutely ready. We will be, Jack said confidently. And Holly, thank you. For what? For trusting me, for being willing to take risks with your music, for caring enough about this community to put your own career on hold. Holly felt that electric current again, the one that seemed to appear whenever their conversation became personal. But this time, instead of stepping back, she moved closer to Jack's. Thank you for reminding me why I fell in love with music in the first place, she said softly. They were standing very close now, close enough that Holly could see the flecks of gold in Jax's brown eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Holly, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. What? I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and honest and absolutely terrifying. Holly's heart was beating so fast she was sure Jax could hear it. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. And then he was kissing her, and all the questions about career decisions and geographic logistics and professional complications disappeared. There was only the warmth of his lips, the strength of his arms around her, and the absolute certainty that this was what she'd been searching for without even knowing it. When they finally broke apart, Holly rested her forehead against Jax's and tried to catch her breath. This changes everything, she said. Does it have to? Jax asked. Can't it just be what it is? Something beautiful that we want to explore? Holly wanted to agree, but she could already hear the practical questions crowding back into her mind. What about her commitments in New York? What about the career she'd spent years building? What about the fact that she'd only been in Carolton for a week and might be making emotional decisions based on temporary circumstances? I don't know, she said honestly. I want it to be that simple, but my life is complicated. All the best things are complicated, Jack said, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. That doesn't mean they're not worth pursuing. Holly nodded, but she wasn't sure she believed him, because the truth was, she'd never encountered anything that felt this significant, and she wasn't sure she was brave enough to handle it. That evening, Holly sat in her room at the inn, staring at her laptop screen. She'd opened her email with the intention of responding to her manager's increasingly frantic messages about upcoming commitments. But she couldn't seem to focus on the words. All she could think about was the feeling of Jax's lips on hers, and the way he'd looked at her when he said he was falling in love with her. She'd spent her entire adult life making careful, rational decisions about her career. Every choice had been evaluated based on its potential to advance her professional goals and expand her opportunities. The idea of making a major life decision based on emotion felt both thrilling and absolutely reckless. Her phone rang, and she saw her manager's name on the display. Hi, Margaret, she answered with a sigh. Holly, finally. I've been trying to reach you for days. Where are you? I told you, I'm in Maine helping with a community fundraiser. Right, but when are you coming back? We need to discuss the spring tour dates. And the recording studio is asking about scheduling for the new album. Holly looked out her window at the snow-covered town below, where lights were twinkling in windows, and she could just make out people walking along the sidewalks, probably heading to Murphy's Tavern, or the community center, or one of the other gathering places that made Carolton feel like a real community. I'm not sure when I'm coming back, she heard herself saying. What do you mean you're not sure? Holly, you have commitments. The Philadelphia Symphony is expecting you for rehearsals starting January 8th. I know. And I'll be there. I need a little more time to figure some things out. Figure what things out? Your career is at a crucial point right now. This is not the time to be taking extended vacations in small towns. Holly felt a flash of irritation. It's not a vacation, Margaret. I'm working on something important. More important than your recording contract? More important than performing with major orchestras? Holly wanted to say yes, but she couldn't quite bring herself to speak the words aloud. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said instead. "I need to think." After she hung up, Holly sat in the darkness for a long time, watching the town below and trying to understand what was happening to her. A week ago, her life had felt settled and successful, if somewhat empty. Now everything felt uncertain and complicated, but also more alive than it had in years. She thought about Jax's question, can it just be something beautiful that we want to explore? Maybe it could be. Maybe she didn't have to make any permanent decisions right now. Maybe she could simply stay open to possibilities and see what developed. But even as she tried to convince herself that this could be simple and uncomplicated, Holly knew that what was happening between her and Jax was too significant to treat casually. It was the kind of connection that demanded everything or nothing, the kind that would reshape her entire understanding of what she wanted from life. The question was whether she was brave enough to let it. Chapter 6. The Conflict. The week before the Christmas Eve concert passed in a blur of final rehearsals, technical adjustments, and mounting excitement throughout Carolton. Holly and Jax had found their rhythm as musical partners, creating arrangements that seemed to surprise even them with their emotional power and innovative beauty. But beneath the professional success, Holly was struggling with growing anxiety about what would happen after the concert. Her manager had called 3 more times, each conversation becoming more tense as Margaret pressed her to commit to specific dates and confirm her availability for upcoming projects. Her booking agent had sent a list of potential performance opportunities that represented the pinnacle of her career ambitions. Solo concerts with major orchestras, recording opportunities with prestigious labels, and collaborations with internationally renowned musicians. Everything she'd worked for was within reach, but accepting it would mean leaving Carolton and leaving Jax. "You're distracted today," Jax observed during Thursday's rehearsal. They were working on the finale piece he'd written specifically for her, but Holly kept missing entrances and losing focus during complex passages. "Sorry," she said, lowering her violin. "I'm just thinking about timing for this weekend." It wasn't exactly a lie. She was thinking about timing, just not the musical kind. "Holly," Jax said gently, "what's going on? You've been distant all week." She wanted to tell him about the phone calls from her manager, about the opportunities waiting for her in New York, about the growing certainty that she was going to have to choose between the life she'd built and the possibility of something entirely new. But every time she tried to bring up the subject, the words stuck in her throat. "It's nothing," she said instead. "Just pre-performance nerves." Jax didn't look convinced, but he didn't push the issue. They finished the rehearsal in professional mode, running through their program efficiently and making final adjustments to transitions and technical cues. "I should probably get going," Holly said as they were packing up. "Christina's expecting me for dinner." "Holly, wait." Jax caught her hand as she reached for her violin case. "I know something's bothering you. Whatever it is, we can work through it together." The kindness in his voice almost broke her resolve. Holly wanted nothing more than to fall into his arms and tell him everything. Her fears about making the wrong choice, her confusion about what she actually wanted, her terror that she might be falling in love with a life that wasn't sustainable in the long term. Instead, she forced a smile. "Everything's fine. I'll see you tomorrow for the final tech rehearsal." But as she drove back to the inn, Holly knew that everything was not fine. She was in love with Jax, but she was also terrified of what that love might cost her. And with the concert just 3 days away, she was running out of time to figure out how to reconcile the competing demands of her heart and her career. Friday's technical rehearsal was supposed to be a final run-through with full lighting, sound, and staging. Holly arrived at the community center expecting a routine practice session, but instead found chaos. "The heating system is acting up again," Liliana explained, meeting Holly at the door with obvious distress. "The temperature in here is barely above freezing, and we can't risk having performers and audience members sitting in these conditions." Indeed, Holly could see her breath in the air, and the volunteers who were setting up chairs were wearing coats and gloves. "How long until it can be fixed?" Holly asked. "The repair company can't get here until Monday," said Santino Howard, who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. We're looking at the possibility of having to cancel the concert entirely." Holly felt her stomach drop. The entire fundraising effort depended on the Christmas Eve concert. Without it, the community center would almost certainly be closed permanently. "What about alternative heating?" she asked. "Space heaters or the electrical system can't handle that kind of load," Miguel Ramirez explained. "We're already pushing the limits with the lighting and sound equipment." "What about moving the concert to a different venue?" Jack suggested, appearing beside Holly with his arms full of electronic equipment. "Where?" Santino asked helplessly. "The school auditorium isn't available. The church sanctuary is too small for 300 people, and any place large enough is either booked or too far away for people to realistically attend." Holly looked around the community center, at the beautiful decorations, the professional lighting setup, the elevated stage area that had been designed specifically for their collaboration. Moving to a different venue would mean starting over completely, with only 3 days to reorganize everything. "We need to think creatively," she said, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "There has to be a solution." They spent the next 2 hours brainstorming alternatives, but every option seemed to create new problems. Outdoor venues were too cold, even with heating. Indoor venues were either too small, unavailable, or acoustically unsuitable for their musical arrangements. "I hate to say this," Santino said finally, "but I think we need to seriously consider postponing the concert until we can get the heating system repaired." "Postponing means canceling," Liliana said flatly. "People have made travel plans, arranged time off work, bought tickets as Christmas gifts. If we postpone now, we'll lose most of our audience. And if we hold a concert in a freezing building, we'll lose our audience to hypothermia," Santino pointed out. Holly felt panic rising in her chest. Everything they'd worked for was falling apart, and there was nothing she could do to fix it. Worse, she realized that the failure of the concert would give her a convenient excuse to return to New York without having to make difficult decisions about her future. The thought made her feel ashamed. These people were depending on her, and her first instinct was to look for an escape route. "Give me 24 hours, she said suddenly. "Don't make any final decisions until tomorrow evening." "Holly, what are you thinking?" Jax asked. "I'm thinking that we've put too much work into this project to give up without exhausting every possibility." She looked around at the group of volunteers and community leaders who had invested so much time and energy in saving their community center. "I'll find a solution." "How?" Santino asked. Holly didn't have an answer, but she knew she had to try. "Trust me." That evening, Holly sat in her room at the inn, laptop open and phone beside her, trying to solve an impossible problem. She'd called every venue within 50 miles, contacted heating equipment rental companies, and even researched the possibility of bringing in temporary structures. Nothing was going to work. At 11 o'clock, her phone rang. Margaret again. "Holly, I need an answer about the spring tour dates. The Philadelphia Symphony is getting nervous about your level of commitment." "Margaret, I can't deal with this right now. I'm in the middle of a crisis here." "What kind of crisis?" Holly found herself explaining the entire situation: the broken heating system, the impending concert cancellation, the community center that would close if they couldn't raise the necessary funds. "Holly," Margaret said when she finished, "this is exactly what I've been worried about. You're getting emotionally involved in a situation that isn't your responsibility. Come back to New York. Honor your existing commitments, and let these people solve their own problems." "These people are my friends," Holly said, surprised by the vehemence in her own voice. "Friends you've known for a week, friends I've known my entire life," Holly corrected. "This is my hometown, Margaret. These are the people who supported me when I was learning to play violin, who celebrated when I got into conservatory, who followed my career even after I left. And now you want to throw away everything you've achieved for them? I want to help them save something that matters." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Holly, I think you need to step back and look at this situation objectively. You're a classical violinist with an international career. You're not a community organizer or a fundraising specialist. What you're trying to do is admirable, but it's not your job. What if I want it to be my job?" The words came out before Holly had fully formed the thought, but as soon as she spoke them, she realized they were true. What if saving the community center, working with Jax, being part of Carolton's future, what if all of that was exactly what she wanted to be doing with her life? Holly, you're not thinking clearly. You're having some kind of crisis brought on by spending too much time in your hometown. It's a common psychological phenomenon. People romanticize their past and think they want to go back to simpler times. This isn't about going back, Holly said. It's about moving forward in a different direction, a direction that will end your career. Maybe my career needs to end. Maybe I need to find something that actually fulfills me instead of just advancing my professional status. Margaret sighed audibly. I'm going to pretend you didn't say that. Get some sleep, solve whatever problems you can solve, and call me when you're ready to discuss your actual future. After she hung up, Holly sat staring at her phone. For the first time, she'd articulated the possibility of choosing Carolton over her established career. And the thought felt both terrifying and liberating. But first, she had to find a way to save the Christmas Eve concert. Holly was still awake at 2 a.m. when inspiration finally struck. She'd been thinking about the problem all wrong. Instead of looking for ways to heat the community center, what if they could find a way to make the cold part of the experience? She grabbed her phone and called Jax, hoping he wouldn't mind being woken up. Holly? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I think I have an idea for saving the concert, but I need to know if it's technically feasible. Okay, I'm listening. What if we embrace the cold instead of fighting it? What if we turn the concert into something that's supposed to happen in winter conditions? I'm not following. An outdoor concert. In the town square, where we held the tree lighting ceremony, we could set up a stage using the community center's equipment, provide blankets and hot chocolate for the audience, and market it as a unique Christmas experience. Jax was quiet for so long that Holly wondered if the call had been dropped. Jax? Are you there? I'm here. I'm just thinking through the logistics. She could hear the excitement building in his voice. It could actually work. The acoustics in the square are surprisingly good because of the way the buildings are positioned. We'd need some weather protection for the electronic equipment, but that's manageable. What about power? Murphy's Tavern has an outlet on their back wall that faces the square. We could run extension cables if Reed agrees to let us use his electricity. Holly felt hope starting to bloom in her chest. Do you think people would actually sit outside in December to listen to a concert? If we make it magical enough, absolutely. Think about it. An outdoor Christmas Eve concert with snow falling, hot chocolate, blankets, caroling under the stars. It could be more special than anything we could create indoors. But what if the weather's terrible? What if it's raining or there's a blizzard? Then we'll figure out something else. But Holly, the weather forecast for Christmas Eve is perfect. Clear skies, light snow, temperatures in the 20s. It could be absolutely beautiful. Holly felt tears prick her eyes. Do you really think we can pull this together in 3 days? I think if anyone can pull this together, it's you. You've been solving impossible problems all week. We've been solving impossible problems, Holly corrected. We've been an amazing team, Jax agreed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Jax? Yeah? I love you. There was a moment of silence, and then Jax said quietly, I love you too. And Holly, we're going to save this concert and this community center, and we're going to figure out how to make everything else work too. Holly wanted to believe him, but she wasn't sure it was possible to have everything she wanted. Some choices, she was beginning to understand, required sacrifice. But for tonight, it was enough to know that they were going to try. Saturday morning brought a flurry of activity that made the original concert planning look simple by comparison. Holly arrived at the town square at 7 a.m. to find Jax already there with Miguel, setting up a temporary stage using platforms borrowed from the community center. How did you get here so early? She asked, accepting a cup of coffee from the thermos Jax handed her. I couldn't sleep after our phone call, he admitted. I kept thinking about all the things we need to coordinate, so I figured I might as well get started. Over the next few hours, the square was transformed by an army of volunteers who appeared as if summoned by magic. Reed Gomez arrived with extension cables and outdoor heaters for the food service area. Christina and her decoration committee draped lights and garland around the entire square, creating a winter wonderland that looked like something from a fairy tale. Liliana coordinated seating arrangements using folding chairs and hay bales covered with blankets. "This is incredible," Holly said, looking around at the bustling activity. "How did everyone know to come help?" "Word travels fast in small towns," Jax explained, "especially when it's about something this important." By mid-afternoon, they had created an outdoor concert venue that was both practical and magical. The stage was positioned so that performers would be framed by the lit Christmas tree, with Murphy's Tavern and other decorated storefronts providing a charming backdrop. Seating areas were arranged in a semicircle around the stage, with pathways that would allow easy movement for volunteers serving hot chocolate and blankets. "We need to do a sound check," Miguel announced. "The acoustics are different outdoors, and we want to make sure everything balances correctly." Holly and Jack spent the next hour running through their entire program, adjusting levels and making modifications for the outdoor setting. To Holly's amazement, the music sounded even better in the open air, more natural and expansive, with the buildings around the square creating subtle reverb that enhanced their arrangements. "This is going to be magical," she said as they finished their final piece. "It already is magical," Jax replied, looking around at the transformed square where dozens of community members were still working to perfect every detail. But as evening approached and the volunteers began to head home, Holly felt anxiety returning. They'd solved the immediate crisis of the venue, but the larger questions about her future remained unanswered. In less than 24 hours, she'd be performing a concert that could determine the fate of the community center. And shortly after that, she'd have to decide whether to return to New York or stay in Carolton to explore the possibility of a completely different life. "Holly," Jack said as they were packing up their instruments, "can we talk?" She nodded, though her stomach was already tightening with apprehension. "I know you've been struggling with something this week, and I think I know what it is." Holly felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Jax, you're trying to decide whether to go back to New York or stay here with me." She couldn't deny it, so she nodded. "I want you to know that I'm not going to pressure you either way. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. But I also want you to know that what we've created together, musically and personally, is worth fighting for. I know it's scary to change the direction of your life, but some opportunities only come once." Holly felt tears threaten. "What if I make the wrong choice? What if I give up everything I've worked for and then regret it? What if you don't give it a chance and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been?" The question hung between them in the cold air, as loaded with possibility as it was with risk. "I need to think," Holly said finally. "Of course. But Holly, whatever you decide, make sure it's what you actually want, not what you think you're supposed to want." As Holly drove back to the inn, she realized that Jax had articulated the heart of her dilemma. Her entire adult life had been shaped by external expectations and professional goals. She'd never really asked herself what would make her truly happy. Tomorrow night's concert would be the culmination of everything they'd worked for together. But it might also be the end of the most meaningful collaboration and the most significant relationship she'd ever experienced. The question was whether she was brave enough to choose love over safety, community over career, possibility over certainty. She had less than 24 hours to decide. Chapter 7, Christmas Resolution. Christmas Eve morning dawned crisp and clear, with a light dusting of fresh snow that made the town square look like a scene from a Christmas card. Holly woke before her alarm, her heart racing with a combination of performance nerves and anticipation for what would be one of the most important days of her life. She'd fallen asleep the night before without making any decisions about her future, but she'd woken with a strange sense of clarity. Today was about the concert, about the community, about fulfilling the commitment she'd made to help save the community center. Everything else could wait until after they'd given Carolton the Christmas Eve performance they deserved. But first, she needed coffee and probably some of Christina's magical breakfast. Downstairs, she found the dining room buzzing with excitement. Several guests were discussing the evening's outdoor concert, and Christina was practically glowing with anticipation as she served fresh-baked cinnamon rolls and perfect eggs Benedict. "How are you feeling?" Christina asked, setting down a plate that looked like it belonged in a food magazine. Nervous, excited, terrified, grateful. Holly took a sip of coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead. All of the above. That sounds about right for someone who's about to give the most important performance of her career. Is it, though? Holly mused. The most important performance of my career? Christina sat down across from her with her own cup of coffee. What do you think? I think it might be the most important performance of my life, but not necessarily my career, if that makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Sometimes the things that matter most don't fit into our professional categories. Holly nodded, grateful for Christina's understanding. Can I ask you something? Anything. How did you know that Miguel was the right person to build a life with? How did you know it was worth taking the risk? Christina smiled, and her expression was soft with memory. I didn't know, not for certain, but I knew that being with him made me feel more like myself than I'd ever felt before. And I knew that the thought of not exploring that possibility scared me more than the thought of changing my plans. Were you scared? Terrified. I had a job offer in Boston, a clear career path, an apartment lined up. The whole thing. Staying in Carolton and opening a bed and breakfast felt like professional suicide. But you did it anyway. I did it anyway. And you know what I discovered? Having a clear career path isn't worth much if it's not leading somewhere you actually want to go. Holly thought about that as she finished her breakfast. She'd spent so many years focused on advancing her career that she'd never really considered whether the destination was somewhere she wanted to be. Whatever you decide, Christina added, make sure it's a choice you can live with. Regret is a heavy burden to carry. Holly spent the morning at the community center, where a team of volunteers was making final preparations for the evening's concert. The heating system was still broken, but the building had been transformed into a staging area for the outdoor event. Instruments and equipment were being organized, programs were being assembled, and costume racks held the elegant winter outfits that performers would wear. Holly! Elise Hall came running toward her, practically vibrating with excitement. Is it true that we're really going to perform outside under the stars? It's true, Holly confirmed, accepting an enthusiastic hug from the little girl. I've never been in an outdoor concert before. Will people really be able to hear us? They'll be able to hear you perfectly. Mr. Jax has some very special equipment that makes sure the music reaches everyone. Marcus appeared beside his sister, trying to look calm but clearly excited. Are you nervous? He asked Holly. A little bit, Holly admitted. Are you? Yeah, but Mr. Jax says that being nervous means you care about doing a good job. Mr. Jax is right. The nerves will disappear as soon as you start playing. Holly spent some time with each of the children who would be performing, helping them with final preparations and offering encouragement. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and she found her own nervousness transforming into anticipation. Ready for our final rehearsal? Jax asked, appearing beside her with his arms full of cables and electronic equipment. More than ready, Holly said, realizing she meant it. They spent the next 2 hours running through their program one last time, working with Miguel to ensure that all technical elements would function smoothly in the outdoor setting. The music sounded incredible, polished but not over-rehearsed. Traditional, but innovative. Professional, but heartfelt. We're going to knock their socks off, Jax said as they finished the final piece. We're going to save the community center, Holly corrected that too. As the afternoon progressed, Holly became aware of increasing activity around the town square. Volunteers were setting up the audience seating area, stringing final decorations, and organizing the hot chocolate stations that would keep concert-goers warm during the performance. At 4 o'clock, people began arriving for the 5:30 concert. Holly watched from the community center window as families bundled in winter coats walked toward the square, many carrying blankets and thermoses. By 5 o'clock, all 300 seats were filled, with additional people standing around the perimeter of the performance area. This is really happening, Holly said to Jax, as they prepared to walk to the square. This is really happening, he agreed. How do you feel? Like I'm about to give the most important performance of my life. Good. That's exactly how you should feel. They walked to the square together, carrying their instruments and wearing the elegant winter outfits that would allow them to look professional while staying warm during the outdoor performance. The scene that greeted them took Holly's breath away. The entire square had been transformed into a magical winter concert venue. Hundreds of people were seated on folding chairs and hay bales, wrapped in blankets and holding steaming cups of hot chocolate. Christmas lights twinkled on every building. The tree provided a spectacular backdrop, and snow was beginning to fall gently, adding natural magic to the already enchanted atmosphere. Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Patricia Hendricks announced as Holly and Jax took the stage, "Welcome to Carolton's Christmas Eve concert, a celebration of music, community, and the magic of Christmas." The applause was warm and enthusiastic, and Holly felt her nervousness completely disappear. This wasn't about technical perfection or professional advancement. This was about sharing music with people she cared about, in a place that mattered to her, for a cause that could make a real difference. "Good evening, everyone," she said into the microphone Miguel had set up. "Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Christmas Eve. We have some very special music to share with you tonight. Arrangements that blend traditional Christmas carols with contemporary elements, performed by musicians who love this community and want to ensure that future generations can experience the same sense of belonging that shaped all of us." More applause, and Holly could see people settling in for what they expected to be a memorable evening. "We'd like to begin with a piece that captures the spirit of Christmas. The idea that magic can happen when we come together with open hearts and shared purpose." Jax played the opening notes of Silent Night, but his electronic arrangement made the familiar melody sound both ancient and completely new. When Holly came in with her violin, playing a harmony line that soared above Jax's foundation, the audience grew completely still. This was the magic they'd been working toward. Music that honored tradition while embracing innovation, that brought together different approaches to create something neither could achieve alone. They moved through their program, and Holly was amazed by how responsive the audience was. People sang along during the participatory sections, applauded enthusiastically after each piece, and maintained the kind of focused attention that performers dream about. When the children joined them for the community showcase segment, the audience's delight was palpable. Elise's piano playing was charming and enthusiastic. Marcus's guitar work was careful and precise. And the other young musicians added their own unique contributions to create something that was both adorable and genuinely musical. "These young people represent the future of music in Carolton," Holly announced as the children took their bows. "With your support tonight, we can ensure that they have a place to continue learning, growing, and sharing their talents with our community." The second half of the concert built toward the finale piece that Jax had written specifically for Holly. As they began the complex arrangement that showcased both her classical training and their collaborative innovation, Holly felt everything click into perfect alignment. This was what music was supposed to feel like, not just technically accomplished but emotionally authentic and personally meaningful. This was what collaboration could achieve when two artists trusted each other completely and worked toward a shared vision. When the final note of the finale piece faded into the snowy air, the audience erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. People were standing, cheering, calling out their appreciation and support. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mayor Hendricks announced, taking the stage, "I'm pleased to announce that tonight's concert has raised $42,000 for community center repairs." The cheering intensified, and Holly felt tears stream down her cheeks. They'd done it. They'd actually saved the community center. "But that's not all," the mayor continued. "I've just received word that the State Arts Council, impressed by tonight's innovative programming and community support, has approved a matching grant that will fund additional improvements and educational programming for the next 5 years. Holly looked at Jax, who was grinning so widely she thought his face might crack. They'd not only saved the community center, they'd secured its future for years to come. "Holly Peterson and Jax Williams," the mayor said, "on behalf of the entire community of Carolton, thank you for reminding us of the power of music to bring people together and create magic." As the audience continued applauding and people began to stand and move around, Holly felt someone tug on her coat. She looked down to see Elise Hall beaming up at her. "Miss Holly, that was the most beautiful concert I've ever heard. Are you going to stay in Carolton now?" The question, asked with a child's direct honesty, cut straight to the heart of the decision Holly had been avoiding. "I don't know yet, sweetie," she said honestly. "I hope you do," Elise said seriously. "We need more beautiful music here." Holly hugged the little girl, her heart full of affection and uncertainty in equal measure. "Holly," Jack said, appearing beside her as the crowd began to disperse. "We did it. We did it," she agreed, falling into his arms for a hug that felt like coming home. "I love you," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I love you too," she replied, and meant it completely. But as they stood together in the magical aftermath of their successful concert, Holly knew that love alone wasn't going to solve the practical questions about their future. She still had commitments in New York, a career that people were counting on her to maintain, and opportunities that might not come again if she walked away from them now. The concert had been perfect, but the hardest decisions were still ahead of her. Later that evening, after the equipment had been packed away and the last volunteers had gone home, Holly and Jax found themselves alone in the town square. The snow was still falling gently, and the Christmas lights created pools of warm color on the white ground. "That was incredible," Holly said, looking around at the square where they'd just given what felt like the performance of a lifetime. "It was perfect," Jax agreed. "And not just the music, the whole experience, the way the community came together, the way everyone contributed to making it work, the way it felt like we were part of something bigger than ourselves." Holly nodded, but she could feel the weight of unspoken questions settling between them. "Jax," she said finally, "we need to talk about what happens next." "I know," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about that too. I got a call from my manager yesterday. There are opportunities waiting for me in New York, recording contracts, performance dates with major orchestras, collaborations with internationally recognized musicians, everything I've worked toward my entire career." "That's wonderful, Holly. You should be proud of what you've achieved. But I also think you should consider what you've achieved here. In the past 2 weeks, you've created music that's more innovative and emotionally powerful than anything on your albums. You've connected with a community in a way that's brought out the best in everyone involved. You've discovered a collaborative relationship that challenges and inspires you." Holly felt tears threaten again. "I know. And that's what makes this so difficult." "What if you didn't have to choose?" Jax said suddenly. "What if there was a way to have both?" "What do you mean?" "What if you kept some of your New York commitments but also built something here? What if you spent part of your time recording and touring, and part of your time working with local musicians and developing innovative programs for the community center?" Holly stared at him. "You think that could actually work?" "I think it could work if we wanted it to work. It would require compromise and creativity and probably some complicated scheduling. But people build bicoastal careers all the time. And what about us? What about our relationship? What about it?" "Long-distance relationships are difficult, Jax, especially when both people have demanding careers." "Difficult doesn't mean impossible," he said, taking her hands in his. "Holly, what we have is worth fighting for. What we've created together musically is worth developing. What you've discovered about yourself here is worth exploring." Holly wanted to believe him, but she was also terrified of making a decision based on optimism that might not survive the practical challenges of dividing her time and attention between two very different worlds. "I need to think," she said finally. "Of course. But Holly, before you decide anything, ask yourself this. What would make you happiest? Not what would be most practical, or most professional, or most sensible, but what would actually make you happy?" As they walked back toward their cars, Holly found herself thinking about Jax's question. When was the last time she'd made a major decision based on what would make her happy rather than what would advance her career? She couldn't remember. Maybe it was time to try a different approach. That night, Holly sat in her room at the inn, looking out at the snow-covered town and trying to imagine what her life could look like if she chose to divide her time between New York and Carolton. It would be complicated, certainly. She'd have to reorganize her entire approach to career planning, renegotiate some of her existing commitments, and figure out how to maintain professional relationships while spending significant time away from the major music centers. But it would also allow her to keep the best elements of both worlds: the professional opportunities and artistic challenges of her established career, and the personal fulfillment and innovative collaboration she discovered with Jax. More importantly, it would allow her to continue developing the most meaningful relationship she'd ever experienced, both personally and professionally. Her phone rang, and she saw her manager's name on the display. "Hi, Margaret," she answered. "Holly, how did the fundraising concert go?" "It was incredible. We raised enough money to save the community center, and the performance was one of the best of my career." "That's wonderful. I'm glad it worked out. Now, about those spring tour dates." "Margaret," Holly interrupted, "I want to propose a different approach to my career planning." "What kind of different approach?" Holly took a deep breath. "I want to maintain my commitments to major orchestras and recording projects, but I also want to spend significant time in Maine, working on collaborative projects and developing community-based programming." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Holly, are you suggesting a part-time career?" "I'm suggesting a more diverse career, one that includes traditional classical performance but also innovation and community engagement." "That sounds like a recipe for professional suicide. You can't maintain your position in the classical music world if you're not available full-time." "What if I'm available full-time, but in a different way? What if instead of taking every opportunity that comes along, I'm more selective about projects that align with my artistic vision and allow flexibility for other commitments?" "Other commitments like what?" "Like the man I'm in love with. Like the community that supported me when I was learning to be a musician. Like innovative projects that push the boundaries of what classical music can be." Margaret was quiet again. "Holly, I think you need to sleep on this. You're making emotional decisions that could have serious professional consequences." "Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm finally making decisions that align with what I actually want, rather than what I think I should want." "Call me after New Year's," Margaret said finally, "when you've had time to think more clearly." After she hung up, Holly realized that the conversation had clarified something important for her. She wasn't ready to abandon her classical career, but she also wasn't willing to abandon what she'd discovered in Carolton, which meant she was going to have to find a way to have both. It would be complicated and challenging and probably messy at times. But as Jax had said, the best things usually were. Holly picked up her phone and sent a text message. "Are you awake?" Jax's response came immediately. "Yes, can't sleep. Too much adrenaline from the concert." "Can you come over? I want to talk about our future. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Holly smiled, looking out at the snow-covered town where she'd rediscovered both her love for music and her capacity for love itself. Some decisions were too important to make alone. Christmas Eve, 1 year later, found Holly standing in the wings of the newly renovated Carolton Community Center, listening to the sold-out audience settling into their seats for what had become an annual tradition: the innovative Christmas concert that blended classical and contemporary music in ways that continued to surprise and delight. The past year had been a whirlwind of change, compromise, and unexpected joy. Holly had spent the spring completing her recording contract in New York, but she'd also returned to Carolton every month for long weekends of collaboration with Jax and work with local musicians. In the summer, she'd moved her primary residence to Maine while maintaining a small apartment in Manhattan for her periodic urban engagements. The arrangement had required careful negotiation with booking agents, creative scheduling with recording studios, and constant communication to make the long-distance aspects of her relationship with Jax work during her New York commitments. But it had also led to some of the most fulfilling and innovative work of her career. "5 minutes, Holly," Miguel called out, checking his lighting board one final time. The community center had been transformed over the past year. The heating system was not only repaired but upgraded to state-of-the-art efficiency. The main hall had been acoustically treated to provide optimal sound quality for both acoustic and electronic performances. A small recording studio had been added in the basement, allowing local musicians to create professional quality recordings. Most importantly, the center had become a hub for musical innovation and education. Holly and Jax had developed a program that brought together classical and contemporary musicians for monthly collaborative concerts. The children's music program had expanded to include composition classes, electronic music instruction, and opportunities for young people to work with visiting professional artists. "Are you ready for this?" Jax asked, appearing beside her with his signature warm smile. "More than ready," Holly said, meaning it completely. This year's Christmas Eve concert was their most ambitious yet. They'd commissioned 3 new pieces from local composers, including a stunning work that featured Elise Hall, now 9 years old, and a remarkably accomplished pianist, as a featured soloist. The program would conclude with the debut of a 20-minute composition that Holly and Jax had spent 6 months creating, a piece that told the musical story of community, tradition, and the courage to embrace change. "How's the audience looking?" Holly asked. "Packed. We've got people here from as far away as Boston and Montreal. Liliana says there are several music journalists in attendance, and someone from Maine Public Radio is recording the entire concert." Holly felt a familiar flutter of performance nerves, but it was the good kind. Excitement rather than anxiety, anticipation rather than fear. "Holly, Mr. Jax!" Elise appeared beside them, practically glowing with excitement in her elegant red dress. "I can't believe I get to perform with you again." "We can't believe we get to perform with you," Holly replied, adjusting a ribbon in Elise's hair. "Are you nervous?" "A little bit, but Marcus says that's normal. He's more nervous than I am, and he's just in the ensemble this year." Marcus, now 11 and significantly more confident than he'd been a year ago, was indeed part of the community ensemble that would perform several pieces during the first half of the concert. His guitar skills had improved dramatically under Jax's instruction, and he'd also begun composing his own pieces. "Places, everyone," Miguel announced. "We're starting in 2 minutes." Holly took her position stage left, where she could make her entrance with the opening piece. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see the audience. Families bundled in their Christmas finest, couples holding hands, elderly residents who'd attended every community center event for decades, and newcomers who'd been drawn to Carolton by its growing reputation as a town that valued both tradition and innovation. In the front row, she spotted Christina and her family, Reed Gomez with his wife and new baby, and dozens of other faces that had become dear to her over the past year. This was her community now, in a way that felt both chosen and natural. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mayor Hendricks announced from the podium, "welcome to the 2nd annual Carolton Christmas Eve concert, featuring Holly Peterson, Jax Williams, and the musicians of our community." The curtains opened, and Holly stepped into the warm stage lights, her violin in hand and her heart full of anticipation for the music they were about to share. The concert was everything they'd hoped it would be, and more. The new commissioned pieces were received with enthusiasm and standing ovations. Elise's solo performance was so moving that Holly saw tears in the eyes of several audience members. The community ensemble played with confidence and joy that spoke to the hours of practice and the supportive environment they'd created. But it was the debut of Holly and Jax's collaborative composition, a piece they'd titled Seasons of Home, that provided the evening's most powerful moment. The music began with a simple melody that Holly played alone, representing the individual journey of discovering one's place in the world. Gradually, Jax's electronic elements joined in, creating harmonic support and rhythmic foundation that allowed the melody to flourish and grow. As the piece developed, other instruments joined the conversation. First the children's ensemble, then adult community members, until the entire stage was filled with musicians creating something beautiful together. The final movement brought all the musical elements together in a celebration of community, collaboration, and the magic that happens when people commit to building something meaningful together. As the last notes faded, the audience erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. "Ladies and gentlemen," Holly said into the microphone as the applause finally quieted, "music has the power to bring us together, to help us express emotions that words can't capture, and to remind us of what's possible when we work toward shared goals. This community center, this town, this moment, all of it exists because people chose to invest in each other and in the belief that beautiful things are worth preserving and creating. More applause, and Holly felt her throat tighten with emotion. 1 year ago, Jax and I came together to try to save this building. What we discovered was something much more valuable. We discovered that home isn't just a place you come from, but a place you choose to build with people you love. She looked at Jax, who was beaming at her from behind his electronic setup. Which brings me to an announcement we'd like to share with you tonight. The audience grew quiet, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Jax Williams and I are engaged to be married. The cheer that went up from the audience was immediate and enthusiastic. Holly saw Elise jump up from her seat and clap her hands together with delight. She saw Christina wipe away happy tears, and Reed Gomez give a thumbs up from his seat. But most importantly, she saw Jax walking toward her with an expression of pure joy and love. "I love you," he said as he reached her, speaking softly enough that only she could hear. "I love you too," she replied, and kissed him in front of 300 people who erupted in cheers and applause. Later that evening, after the equipment had been packed away and the last audience members had gone home, Holly and Jax found themselves alone in the community center's main hall. The Christmas decorations twinkled in the dim lighting, and the space felt full of the magical energy that always lingered after a successful performance. "Can you believe it's been a year?" Holly asked, leaning against Jax's shoulder as they sat in 2 folding chairs on the empty stage. "It feels like yesterday and like a lifetime ago, all at the same time," Jax replied, his arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever regret it? The complications, the travel, the way we've had to work around 2 different career paths?" "Never," Jax said without hesitation. "Do you?" Holly thought about the past year, the months she'd spent in New York fulfilling her recording and performance commitments, the long weekends when she'd flown back to Maine just to spend 2 days with Jax, the complicated scheduling that had required them to coordinate their professional lives around their relationship. It had been challenging, certainly. There had been times when the distance felt overwhelming, when professional pressures made it difficult to maintain their personal connection, when the logistics of building a life together seemed impossibly complicated. But there had also been moments of extraordinary joy and fulfillment. The satisfaction of creating innovative music that challenged both of them artistically. The pleasure of watching their community programming flourish and grow. The deep contentment of being in a relationship with someone who understood and supported her ambitions, while also inspiring her to think beyond traditional career expectations. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Though I have to admit, I'm looking forward to the next phase being a little simpler." "About that," Jax said, and Holly could hear the smile in his voice. "I have some news that might make things even more complicated." "Oh no, what now?" "I got a call yesterday from a producer in Nashville. He's heard our collaborative work, and he wants to know if we'd be interested in creating an album together. Not just classical music with electronic elements, but something entirely new, a fusion that could appeal to both traditional and contemporary audiences." Holly sat up and stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. It would mean spending several months in Nashville, working with some incredible musicians and producers, but it would also mean creating something that doesn't exist anywhere else in the music industry." Holly felt excitement building in her chest. "That sounds incredible. And terrifying. And incredible. So you're interested?" "I'm very interested. But what about the community programming here? What about the educational work we've been developing? What if we could do both? What if we recorded the album during the summer when the community programs are on break? And what if the success of the album brought more attention and resources to what we're building here?" Holly looked around the community center, at the space they'd helped save, at the evidence of all the programs and events that had grown from their initial collaboration, at the physical representation of what was possible when people committed to building something meaningful together. "You know what I think?" she said finally. "What?" "I think we're going to spend the rest of our lives creating impossible projects and then figuring out how to make them work." "That sounds perfect to me," Jax said, pulling her closer. "It sounds perfect to me too." As they sat together in the quiet of the community center, surrounded by the decorations that volunteers had hung with care and the instruments that had created magic just hours earlier, Holly realized that she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. She'd found a place where her music could make a real difference in people's lives. She'd found a partner who challenged her artistically and supported her personally. She'd found a community that valued both tradition and innovation, that welcomed change while honoring its history. Most importantly, she'd found a way to build a life that was both professionally fulfilling and personally meaningful. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she left Carolton for conservatory training all those years ago. It was better. "Merry Christmas, Jax," she said softly. "Merry Christmas, Holly. Here's to many more." Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, coating the town in fresh beauty and promise. Inside the community center, two musicians sat planning their future together, surrounded by the evidence of what love and collaboration could create when people were brave enough to believe in possibilities. The Christmas Eve concert had ended, but the music they were making together was just beginning, and in the peaceful quiet of that snowy Christmas night, with love surrounding them like the gentlest of melodies, Holly and Jax drifted into dreams as sweet as the music they created together. And so our Christmas story comes to a gentle close, like the final notes of a beautiful carol fading into the peaceful night. As Holly and Jax found their harmony together, may you too find the peace and comfort of this Christmas season. Let the warmth of their love story carry you into the sweetest of dreams, where your own melodies of joy and contentment can play softly until morning. Sleep well, and sweet dreams.